Welcome back to the Hearthstone Collegiate Championships. We are live at the Esports Arena in Santa Ana, California, and what a wild ride it has been to get to this point. My name is Cora Georgiou, and I'm joined on the desk by Nathan, that's Admirable Zamora. 7 weeks of Swiss, 2 playoff brackets, and we're finally here, Nathan. How does it feel?
It feels great. It's also been kind of a standard ride that these players have been going through, and a big change that they had. You know, the regular season they were playing with Grand Tournament in the mix, with BlackRock Mountain in the mix. Once they hit that playoff stage, we journeyed to Ungoro, and there was a massive upheaval where the decks were concerned. And every single step of the way, I feel like the players have been challenged, and every single week the competition has delivered some sort of surprise. It's fantastic to be here today.
It's always been something new and exciting. Of course, we've had one fantastic match already today, but we are getting in to match number 2. It is going to be Poly Montreal up against North Carolina. Frank Shadow, Emmy Sci-Hi, and Brio against Sundance, Jay Willie, and Crusher 99. Nathan, remind us, how exactly is this format going to work?
Well, it's a lot different than the way that they played throughout the regular season. They were collaborating as a team, which they'll still be doing here today, but they have to win their individual matches. All 9 classes represented across the board for these players. Their goal is to win 2 out of 3 of the sets that take place. The way that they do that is they win 2 out of 3 of the games that they'll play within those sets. And here, it's not typical Conquest. You get 1 chance to win with a deck. So your goal is to win 2 games to win a set, win 2 sets to win a match.
Game, set, match. It is a best of 3 within a best of 3. And we have 2 fantastic teams. But first, introducing Poly Montreal up on the stage. We had a chance to sit down with them yesterday. These 3 guys are fantastic Hearthstone players, fantastic students, and they are ready to roll.
Yeah, the thing that I've found most enjoyable about it is the dynamic between the 3 of them, Brio, Emmy Sci-Hi, and Frank Shadow. Emmy Sci-Hi and Frank Shadow were actually playing Hearthstone prior to Brio was. They all had the same class, as you can see, all computer engineers. And Brio was kind of looking at it going, I'm not sure I want to play that game. I don't think I want to try it. And they tried the game, and he was like, wow, this is great. Since then, he's played the most. He's been the one with the most success on ladder so far, and there you can see the collective beanies. These guys are a team ready to roll.
Absolutely, they are. And here we have their opponents. It is North Carolina.
Yeah, we sat down with North Carolina as well, and also interesting dynamics. The 3 of these, I felt like they were very different individuals. One is a very analytical mind. The other one is a very intuitive mind and feel. Sundance was the one who felt intuitive to me. Jay Willie, very analytical. And Crusher 99, it felt like he just relaxed and didn't take the game quite seriously. But they all had different approaches, and they all seemed like they had great heads on their shoulders.
Yeah, 3 very different perspectives. In fact, Sundance has only been playing this game since November. He hit Legend for the first time just a month in December. So different challenges for both teams, but seems like 3 guys on each team coming together really with different perspectives to make a fantastic group.
Yeah, and just look at the sort of the body language on the 2 teams. It was Polytechnique. They felt very relaxed and very jubilant.
Coming in, put the beanies on, ready to go.
North Carolina, they look very focused to me.
Yeah, that's absolutely what we saw yesterday, and here reflected on stage. Of course, now there's an audience. Now there's a lot of pressure, so much on the line. Started with over 800 teams in this tournament. Now we're down to the top 2 in every region, the top 8 teams overall. So much on the line for these guys, and absolutely incredible to see them make it all the way here. Their journeys have not been easy.
No, they certainly haven't been. And at this point, it's just yet another change with them being under the lights, on the cameras, a live crowd in front of them as they compete for their share of $160,000 in scholarships. So our first match we'll be taking a look at is set number 1 with in this one. It's Frank Shadow's going to be on Paladin, Warrior, and Rogue. He's taking on Sundance with Hunter, Warrior, and Rogue himself. So to me, the big standouts here are the Paladin and the Hunter. We've started to see Paladin really to turn the corner on where its builds are going. A lot of heavy Murloc builds where they try to simply get a lot of synergy minions on board and completely take advantage of that. Rogue, it's been split between Miracle and between Quest. Hunter is really shied away from Quest, been more focused on early game synergy, landing a big Houndmaster turn and taking the board there.
Yeah, Hunter has simply risen up the ranks in this meta. Of course, Rexar was nowhere to be seen pre-Ungoro, so it's a nice change of pace to see that back in the meta. But we are going to be getting into a Warrior Miracle here for game number 1, and it is going to be Quest versus Pirates. So when these are two very, very different decks, one is extremely aggressive and one is extremely defensive, how does the dynamic work between these two archetypes?
Well, that's the cool thing about it to me, is that Quest, they're always going to start in your opening hand. That doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to accept that Quest. For Frank Shadow on the top here, playing Quest Warrior, his goal is simply to play a lot of taunts in a row. And if he's brave enough to go into the Fire Plume's Heart and pluck that Sulfuros from the middle, he gets a lot of damage as his reward. But versus Pirate Warrior, that's not a class where you really want the Quest. Your main goal is simply to outscale your opponent with big taunt minions. You simply stay alive. He doesn't know what kind of warrior he's up against right now, and that's why he's kept the Quest. Oftentimes, this is just purely a liability. He doesn't need that in order to win the game.
The thing is, if you mulligan away your Quest and you run into a Quest Warrior mirror where they have kept the Quest, you're essentially conceding the match from the mulligan. So it is just a risk that you cannot take at this point. It is going to hurt them just a little bit, but we see Armorsmith in hand for Poly Montreal, and that is going to be a huge, huge aspect of this matchup for the Taunt Warrior.
That could have been one of the choices that's influenced by the nature of those polarized matchups as well. If you know that you can't afford to mulligan the Quest because your opponent could be doing the same thing, Armorsmith can help keep that life total topped up and buy you the time necessary because of that card liability. Eventually, if they have time to play their big taunt minions, North Carolina just won't have the gas to push through, where their strategy much less subtle. They're trying to get minions on board, start getting damage out of them, and then deliver that final burst with Arcanite Reaper, with Mortal Strikes, with Heroic Strikes, or maybe even just overwhelming pressure.
Yeah, North Carolina is going to get on the board very fast, deal a burst of damage very quickly, and if Poly Montreal can stabilize late in the game, they'll be low on health, but they should be able to win the game from there. So it's just a matter of, do they have the time to be able to find that stabilizing point and win the game from that point? Yeah,
and there's a lot of cool cards that are involved in that. Of course, Armorsmith looking great right here, but Sleep with the Fishes also in hand for Poly Montreal. It's 3 damage to each damaged minion on board. You combine that with a Ravaging Ghoul or a Whirlwind, and you can kill every 4 health minion that's out there.
Frothing Berserkers beware.
Yeah, and that's one of the big swing turns they have to stabilize that board position. It's a lot of value, and while you don't get a lot of your own pressure, your goal isn't to pressure. It's simply to not die.
No, if you can remove the board and have a high enough life total from that point on, it's difficult for the Pirate Warrior to burn quite as much from hand, especially when your board is going to be almost exclusively filled with taunt minions.
Well, this is where the game gets interesting, is now Sundance has a lot of options in front of them for how they want to go forward. Do they feel like they need to keep these minions attacking? Do they feel like Armorsmith needs to be dealt with in a very efficient manner? Do they feel like they can afford to spend what they have and try to build to a big board state? You know, Frothing Berserker doesn't look that bad here, but you have to think about that. Armorsmith sticking around means it's going to start chewing through those 1/1s. It's going to start topping off their life total. That card is a huge hit where Sundance is concerned right now. So North Carolina is going to think about the best way to take on this Armorsmith. It looks like Fiery War Axe is what they're concluding because of that Bloodsail Cultist.
Armorsmith is just too big of a liability. If Stonehill Defender were to come down on turn 3 for Poly Montreal and North Carolina hadn't have removed the Armorsmith, it would just be almost too much for them to overcome at this point. So wisely clearing the Armorsmith, yes, sacrificing a bit of damage now, but it will hopefully pay off for them in the long run. A second Armorsmith drawn from Montreal, however.
Well, this is a really interesting turn for them as well. The Fiery War Axe being played looks like it's signaled to Poly Montreal that Bloodsail Cultist is a very real possibility from the other side. They're going to use Fiery War Axe just to kill a 1/1 to prevent the ability of that Bloodsail Cultist to buff up that Fiery War Axe. They're trying to trim the value that minion would provide here. So not an effective swing, but they're reading North Carolina's hand in this spot.
It's some excellent forethought coming out of Poly Montreal. That's exactly what you need to do. Keep the board clear. You're not, there's nothing threatening your life total at this point, and turn 3 is a power turn for Pirate Warrior with Bloodsail Cultist and Frothing Berserker. If you limit the Bloodsail Cultist, you're likely going to have options for the Frothing Berserker. You have Shield Slam, you have Execute in deck. Sleep with the Fishes could clear it off with the help of your Fiery War Axe. So you're giving yourself the most outs for the possible options that North Carolina could have this turn.
Yeah, it's a very, very wise choice. It's an important thing to understand those dynamics in the matchup. The first time you play against Pirate Warrior, it's just a 1/1.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a Bloodsail Cultist. Ooh.
Now it's a 4/2 weapon and a 1/1 and a 3/4.
And my minion's dead. And he
looks
still
a
got the
little bit
weapon.
worse then.
And now I'm dead.
And oops, I'm dead. Feels Pirate Warrior, man.
This is a big disruption to Sundance in his game plan, though. I'm sure he's got Bloodsail Raider, very efficient minion, but they do have to be concerned with how they actually get their cards active. You know, their window of opportunity is fairly early on. If they don't apply enough pressure, it's going to be easy for Poly Montreal to get to those late points. If they apply too much, they risk Sleep from the Fishes or Brawl getting too much value. It's starting to become a dangerous game plan, and Shield Slam is a great draw for Poly Montreal.
Absolutely a perfect clear with the shield block and the shield slam on the Frothing Berserker, putting Poly Montreal further out of range of damage from Sundance and from North Carolina. This is going very well for Montreal if they can pick up some of their bigger taunts heading forward. Direhorn Hatchling, Alley Armorsmith into Curator. It's looking very good for them so far.
Yeah, the one thing that they have going against them is that they're actually not drawing their taunt minions. They're drawing all that utility. So Brawl in hand, maybe it gets some value this game, but so far it's been a battle of card for card. It's just North Carolina presenting a threat, Poly Montreal answering the threat. It's hard for Brawl to get value if your opponent actually doesn't have that many minions on board.
You know, all things considered, the Taunt Warrior, it runs a good amount of taunts, but it's not that many more than 7. You've got Dirty Rat, Alley Armorsmith, usually 1 copy of Direhorn Hatchling, Curator, Primordial Drake, Stonehill Defenders. You have a good amount.
It's a lot of taunts.
It's a lot of taunts. But you also have a lot of removal and situational cards. So in some cases, you draw one or the other. In this case, it was the removal and Armorsmith.
Yeah, they all serve a purpose. North Carolina, they're starting to run dry on minions. It looked like their plan to me was to get the Arcanite Reaper online, try to make a bigger Bloodsail Raider, and in the same turn, buff it with Cultist. So the value from Bloodsail Cultist was delayed quite a bit, but is this Arcanite Reaper buffed up enough to get the job done? Poly Montreal is going to start needing to draw taunt minions to get in the way of this damage.
This is a heap of damage coming out of North Carolina. Heroic Strikes in hand, of course, with the Bloodsail Cultist. That's potentially 18 damage represented from the Arcanite Reaper if North Carolina elects not to hit this turn. So while Montreal is currently sitting pretty above 30, eventually the damage will build up from North Carolina. So they need to start drawing those taunt minions very quickly.
The other decision here for North Carolina, it's not just simple as to attack. They could get an extra damage out of this. They may have to be using this Arcanite Reaper to attack over minions, and a lot of that has to do with their hand texture. 2 copies of Heroic Strike, those are finishing blows. They are not meant to service as cards that you fight for the board with, especially not when you have a 5 power weapon on board. So they're looking at this turn and going, you know what? This is probably going to have to chop through some taunts. Let's just leave it here for now and wait till the moment's right.
If you do elect to not attack this turn, buff up your Arcanite Reaper with Bloodsail Cultist next turn. 6 damage Reaper goes right through Direhorn Hatchling on turn 5. That's something that you need to be aware of, especially since your opponent is going into turn 5.
And now what does this signal to North Carolina? Poly Montreal is on one of their prime turns. It's Alley Armorsmith, it's Direhorn Hatchling. Any other taunt that costs 5, where it costs 5 or less mana.
Heck, you might even see an Acolyte of Pain come down here.
They just armored up.
Yeah.
Sundance and North Carolina have to be talking about what Poly Montreal's hand possibly looks like at this point. You know, I'm thinking Sleep with the Fishes, Ravaging Ghoul.
Possibly a copy of Brawl. There's usually
Brawl.
2 in deck. Or very expensive taunt minions, Primordial Drake Curator.
Yeah. So, I mean, they can trim this hand down and go, you know what? They just don't have any big minions, or they don't have any of the mid-sized minions in hand. And that'll be Bloodsail Cultist after the Bloodsail Raider here. And that's a good-looking push.
I think this is definitely a signal to North Carolina to go for it. Really play out their hand in the way that it is meant to be played in Pirate Warrior, and that is pushing damage to face.
That being said, the Sleep with the Fishes is active now because of that Ravaging Ghoul. So Poly Montreal looking like they have a great answer to this already set up. They're going to take a lot of damage in the meantime, but 1 taunt behind with an Armorsmith behind it can change all of that work that North Carolina's been working on.
Especially if that taunt is an Alley Armorsmith giving you additional armor. But the draw is an Execute, not necessary for Poly Montreal right now, especially when Ghoul Fishes is just an incredibly efficient clear.
Yeah, they have an option to say, use Execute, use their Fiery War Axe instead, but I think having the Fiery War Axe on board as a very flexible answer is a good thing, and Sleep with Fishes, again, it's a hard card to use by itself. It's better to combo it here.
If you can get a reasonable Sleep with the Fishes, I think you take it. Execute is going to be maybe a little bit more flexible. There's not actually much that you're going to need to kill with the addition of removal spells this late into the game. Core Chron Elite comes down. That gets axed usually.
Well, This might be where North Carolina starts to look at the all-in plan. They have 4 turns to unlock all their weapon swings. If they were able to connect with all of them, you're looking at 22, 26 damage with the heroic strikes alongside and 28 damage with that South Sea deckhand. And with Poly Montreal hitting that gain 2 life armor up button every turn, you're still a little bit off. So something has to give for Sundance here. Every single one of their minions has been killed thus far, and that's a prime source of damage for Pirate Warrior. They need to connect with minions.
Well, but here's the thing. North Carolina, if they are able to get all of their weapon swings to face and both heroic strikes, which wisely I think they're just going for now. They know this damage is going face. They don't want to sacrifice heroic strikes if a taunt were to come down. They're still not quite there. And there are a myriad of taunt minions in deck for Montreal, just not in hand.
So here's the downside for Montreal at this point. Poly Montreal has not drawn a single taunt minion.
That's kind of incredible to think about.
That quest that they kept has just been a completely dead card. It prevents them from being 1 card deeper into their deck. That next card's a minion. I mean, this game could be over next turn. If North Carolina draws Leroy Jenkins, they're going to have 14 damage from hand. That is a card that will instantly end the game, and Poly Montreal nowhere near killing North Carolina right now.
I mean, by my count, there could be as many as 10, 11 taunt minions in this deck. That's a third of your deck, and you have not found a single one at this point. The odds of that are staggering to me, especially when it is so integral that you get those taunt minions online in this matchup.
This is the turn of truth, I think, for Poly Montreal. If they get past this one safe, I think there's a good chance they come away with it. And that's not lethal this turn, so North Carolina is going to have to figure out where this damage is divided. Now that there's an Armorsmith on board, fighting for board costs a lot of potential win.
Yes, it does.
That Frothing Berserker's never getting through. The South Sea Deckhand can, but he's got charge, so. North Carolina is, I think that at this stage, even though it looks dire for Poly Montreal, I think North Carolina's in a heap of trouble.
They're still not quite there, and that's just showing kind of how polarizing this matchup can be. Taunt Warrior just has so much defensive ability. The natural armor up hero power just pushes the Pirate Warrior even further back, forces them to draw even more damage. And there wasn't a lot of minion damage coming from North Carolina very early on, which I think has hurt them. No Core Chron elites thus far. Frothing Berserker did not stick.
Nothing stuck.
Yeah.
Everything died. Patches was around for a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, a turn.
He's all right. 1
2.
damage.
That's the game plan right there. It's face up. If Poly Montreal draws a taunt minion here, I think they have all but won the game.
That's really what I was getting at. Yes, you stabilize very low, but ultimately you do stabilize. That's a Primordial Drake.
That'll work.
4/8 taunt and 2 armor here because of the damage to the Ghoul and the Armorsmith. You don't even have to sacrifice your hero power, practically.
And they're not worried about damaging their own minions in this spot. They don't die. And they're protected. Looks great. Slam it.
Looks good to me. I mean, how does North Carolina get over this? Double Mortal Strike from hand wouldn't clear the game now?
I mean, that's pretty much their hope is a double Mortal Strike while they're below 13 health. At 12 health, Mortal Strike deals 6 damage. That's a very limited amount of time to get that job done. Now, that's probably something Poly Montreal's thinking about is at this stage, like, how do we actually lose? 1 Mortal Strike joins the hand, but that Primordial Drake is not going anywhere.
2 more turns of armor up from Poly Montreal will put them out of range of a double-activated Mortal Strike. They just need to get above 12. They're at 10 already. And this is really just showing how much Pirate Warrior has suffered, I feel, from the loss of Sir Finley Murgleton. When you don't have Life Tap and Steady Shot as hero power options, well, armor up is not advancing your game plan whatsoever.
Or also when you just kill all their minions in a row. Galaka Crawler's a good card.
Yeah, that's true.
Blow up a pirate, get +1/+1. That's one of those ones that I think has been keeping Pirate Warrior at bay.
Yeah.
Hey.
See what you did there.
This is grim.
Dire straits for North Carolina. Looked like the stars were aligning a little bit, but something's got to give, and eventually Poly Montreal was going to draw a taunt. It's kind of incredible that it took as long as it did.
The other factor to consider here is that Game 1 is going on simultaneous on the other side as well. So they're having to divide attention, trying to figure out how to tiptoe through these situations. They're going to Mortal Strike the Primordial Drake to try to set up some damage through it. And this is a long shot at being successful.
Yes, it is important to note this is game 1 of set 1, but game 1 of set 3 is going on simultaneously. So after this, it will be one game at a time. The teams can communicate with each other during these matches. So yes, they are talking it through, but with 2 games going on at the same time in different sets, it's a lot to divide your attention with.
Yeah, I mean, you notice that on North Carolina's side, they've been going back and forth between games and providing input. It's tough to play 2. It's tough to play 1 at once, let alone 2 at once. You know, maybe not for everybody, but for me.
I'm not one of those streamers that can multi-box on 3 servers.
I'm not a pat my head and chew bubble gum kind of, I don't know, whatever that thing is.
Multitasking is tough, Admirable.
Another minion, and North Carolina the window is very quickly closing. I think they're done, so.
Yeah, I think the window is shut. Poly Montreal at 13. 1 mortal strike down. I'm not seeing a way for North Carolina to close this one out. Close, but no cigar.
It would require just an absolutely crazy tech card at this point to win.
Deathwing.
That's very crazy, and that's not in here.
I mean, we don't know for sure. We don't have the deck lists, but it would be a bit counterintuitive to the game plan, I feel.
You know for sure.
Just a smidge.
Just a
little bit.
Touch.
It might be in the Taunt Warrior deck for all we know.
That's definitely possible. I mean, another big thing to blow up the board. Primordial Drake's kind of doing that, though.
Yeah. Primordial Drake's doing a great job. When you have Sleep with the Fishes to back that up, it's...
Honestly, that's what dragons should do, too. They should eat things or breathe fire. This is doing both.
And apparently put up a big wall, too.
Great turn for Poly Montreal. Just resources burned from North Carolina's side. Execute already in hand to deal with this Frothing Berserker. Going to get some more armor off of it. Draw a card.
What more can you really want?
It's the dream.
Pick up another taunt here, and it's lights out. It already is lights out. Let's be perfectly honest here.
16 is a lot, and 18 is going to be even more. And I have 2 cards left. One of them's half used.
This is the power of Armorsmith. It was a card that has been out of the meta for so long. But now that it's back in, it really is giving the Taunt Warrior exactly what it needs against other aggressive decks. Plus, you have the added fact that Armorsmith always wins brawls, or so Kit Kats has always been saying. So, you know, if that's not enough.
That's just sort of a testament to the strength that you can have in this matchup, too. I mean, they've had Brawl in their hand the whole game. They'd execute the whole game. The quest has done nothing.
Yeah.
They're still winning.
That's 3 dead cards, and you're still this far ahead after drawing no taunts.
That'll do, deck.
That'll do.
That'll do.
Okay, so with upgrade, that's 8
It's
from the weapon.
It's a matter of motions. Down to 14 if they connect again and have Leroy. That's 10 more, so they're still 4 damage off, even
1
if they
mortal
draw.
strike left in the deck. Bash rotated out.
And they're starting to die as well. And Dirty Rat is just another taunt to sit in the way. And again, Armorsmith's still there. That's the close.
Goal into Bloodsail Raider, or you could just weapon in, honestly, at this point. I don't think you're worried about anything. Might as well get a draw.
They can just execute it.
Yeah, you're not using it for anything else.
The world.
Point being, too many good options at this point.
It's a nice problem to have.
Just baffles me throughout this entire game. 1 taunt minion. Okay, well now 2 with the Dirty Rat. So 2.
Yeah, I mean, it was
Would need 5 more to complete the quest.
It's just the power of the utility they had.
Well, Warrior has always had incredibly efficient removal. Their single target removal has been second to none. And remember, Execute used to cost 1 mana.
Oh, yeah.
And even at 2, it is still an auto include in every Control Warrior deck.
Just about. It's tough to beat that sort of removal.
Even tougher for North Carolina because it is just not going to be possible. All but over at this point in favor of Poly Montreal.
Yeah, you have to admit, though, they gave it their best go.
They did.
I think one of the big factors here was actually Poly Montreal just recognizing to kill the patches early on with the Fiery War Axe. If they hadn't done that, that Bloodsail Cultist would have come down a lot earlier. It perhaps would have forced some removal from Poly Montreal's side, and then maybe Frothing Berserker actually sticks to the board at that point.
It's possible.
So the recognition that was the setup that North Carolina was going for, I think gave Poly Montreal just that huge advantage early on.
You know, credit where credit is due, though. North Carolina is playing the game out. You don't want to give up if even there is a sliver of hope that you can win, but If there is one, I'm just not seeing it at this point. A lot on the line, though. Like we've been saying, $160,000 in prize money. This is their shot to make it to the semifinals.
Yeah, I imagine it's likely they're just diverting the attention to the other side and going, yeah, well, lost
Now
this
we got
one.
more time to
two more
play
tries.
set 3. Yeah. And of course, it is the first team to pick up 2 sets. Within each set, there are a best of 3, so you need to win 2 games in a set, 2 sets to win the match. So even if set 1 is lost for North Carolina, they can still win the match by winning sets 2 and 3.
Trust in your teammates is still there. A little bit of a different form. And again, too little, too late. Just Poly Montreal dominated this game, and North Carolina, and a mortal strike themselves, got in a little bit of fashion here. Game 1 to Poly Montreal.
And what a game it was. Looked like a very weak opener from them. They kept the quest, not knowing whether or not they'd be up against Taunt Warrior or against Pirate Warrior. Ultimately, it was Pirate Warrior, in which keeping the quest is just a big drawback. And it did not matter. They had a brawl in hand the entire time, execute in hand the entire time, quested nothing, and still a dominating performance for Poly Montreal in Game 1.
And that's what the deck looked like it was built to do. You know, multiple copies of Sleep with Fishes, the Armor Smith as well. It's meant to be able to pull it back in situations where you can't risk mulliganing Fireplume's Heart.
Absolutely. And it worked wonders in this case. The Pirate Warrior certainly has... it's lost a little bit of power. Bash has rotated out. Certainly Murgleton, I think, is one of the biggest factors, but it's still a strong deck. It's a deck that a lot of people were very worried about going into Ungoro because it was so well established, and it was one that wasn't losing all that much. But ultimately, it did lose that first game in set number 1, and here we have those results for you. The Warrior from Poly Montreal and Frank Shadow taking out the Warrior from North Carolina and Sundance. That is only the first game of the first set. The first game of set number 3 is still going on. We will have those results for you very shortly. A lot more Hearthstone to be played in this matchup.
That's right. And notice the red circle is now over the Warrior on North Carolina's side. Again, you get one chance to play a deck in this one, period. You don't get a second try if you lose with it like in traditional Conquest. Their goal is just simply to win 2 games. So they have to win with Hunter and Rogue if they want to win their first set.
Yeah, it is not a traditional Conquest format. We will be going into set number 2, game number 1. So Emi Sci-Hi taking on Jay Willie. And here we have Warlock Priest Mage up against Paladin Warlock Mage. I'm actually surprised that we're seeing duplicate classes in these first 2 sets. In the first one, there was the Warrior duplicate and the Rogue. And here we are seeing the Mage and the Warlock.
To me, I just want to see what the Mage and the Paladins and the Warlocks look like. Warlock is in a kind of an interesting spot right now where Zoo feels like the best way that players have been making impact with that deck. But Paladin has just been gone through this weird evolution where it started as like a mid-range Murloc build where you step through the whole way up the curve. And then Gentle Megasaur got added into the deck. It got a little more aggressive. And now a lot of the players I've run into on ladder, they're just full Murlocs, and they're trying to just simply kill as fast as possible. And as we roll into the next game, Poly Montreal is going to be on Warlock, and that's a very interesting looking hand, Cora.
Yeah, this is definitely going to be a controlling Warlock build. At least the Trailblazer, one of my favorite cards to come out of Journey to Ungoro. Battlecry, shuffle a sealed Ungoro pack into your deck. So this is an indication that Emi Sci-Hi and Poly Montreal are going for the long game. Jay Willie in North Carolina, however, we see the Murlocs in the opening hand. They have a much more aggressive initial opener.
Yeah, they do have Curator in their hand early on, though, so this is more of the mid-range style that steps its way up the curve. There's often Primordial Drake in this deck. When you have Curator, it's very easy to add in Stampeding Kodo to the deck at times, have big swings against like Doomsayer or just some annoying taunt minions that get in the way. And then also Galaka Crawler is a possibility as well, in case you face off against Pirates. So something else to think about there. Meanwhile, in Emi Sci-Hi's deck, it's starting to look like a handlock variant here with the Humongous Razor Leaf drawn. This is a deck that wants to play like Ancient Watcher, Humongous Razor Leafs, and then use Silence or Taunt effects to start getting value out of that. I mean, Razor Leaf looks great at a 3-mana 4/8 until you read can't attack. So if they can silence that effect off, suddenly they have a large minion that can start providing damage. Or if they can play Sun Fury Protector or Defender of Argus, just becomes a big taunt and it absorbs damage. So trying to emulate that Reno Jackson style of effect where you just buy a lot of extra health.
Yeah, reminiscent of your handlocks of old, where Molten Giant and Mountain Giant were incredibly dominant. And just want to note, the scores you see above both of the team names are the scores specifically for this set. So we are in game number 1 of set number 2. 2. Of course, Poly Montreal won game 1 of set 1. Yes, this is one match, but there are 3 individual series being played within this match. So a lot to keep up with, I know, but we're going to keep reminding you as we go along, try to break it down as much as we possibly can.
You can see Poly Montreal having a discussion about this game. They're a lot more focused now that we're down to the single game at a time. It's huddled around. They're taking notes. It's looks like a little bit more discussion. That was just turn 1.
It's a lot to think about. Absolutely. You don't know exactly what your opponent is playing, but with the Vilefin Inquisitor coming down on 1, you have an idea of what is starting to be in their deck. And like you were saying, Paladin has gone through a really interesting evolution since the beginning of Journey to Ungoro. It looked like Galvadon was going to be very strong before Ungoro came out, and we very quickly realized that it was actually pretty bad. So nobody's playing buff Paladin decks, but mid-range and control Paladin have proven to be pretty good.
I run into them occasionally. It feels as though the right mix of spells hasn't been found just yet.
Yeah.
It relies a lot on combinations of cards. And it's a very spectacular thing to do. So, your games end in a way that you've dominated your opponent or you got dominated. A lot of the cards are just utility-based. And for me, the thing that's developing here is North Carolina, when they see this mistress of mixtures on turn 1, are they pinpointing something like Handlock right away? Are they thinking maybe there's Kazakus in here? This is a tough call if you're in Jay Willie's spot. He's the one leading the charge here. He's got to figure out what it is this deck's doing.
It's definitely not the most popular Warlock build we've been seeing. Kazakus Mage is running around a little bit, mostly in Brian Kibler's stream. I don't think we've seen much of Kazakus Warlock thus far. Handlock was certainly starting to pick up popularity near the beginning of Ungoro, and then people just quickly realized Discard Zoo was probably your best option for Warlock. But nonetheless, the Warlock class, I would say, is at the bottom of the barrel if you're looking at power rankings for Ungoro meta right now.
I think it's one of the reasons I like the Handlock deck. You're just trying to put together a 1-2 punch. It's a lot for your opponent to handle. But in North Carolina's spot, Paladin's got a lot of great answers to some of those big minions. Either you could play a Spike Ridge Steed and try to match that power. You have Aldor Peacekeeper, reduce its power to 1. You'll sometimes have a quality to push through a giant board of big health minions. There's a lot of utility in North Carolina's deck that can fight against what Poly Montreal wants to do. So the thing to look at for me is the card economy of each team. If Poly Montreal can keep life tapping, keep their life total high, and keep North Carolina on the back foot, they will eventually amass a lot more cards. But if North Carolina can keep the pressure high and force Poly Montreal to maybe use some of these tools in a way that they didn't plan for, that's a great way to keep them at bay.
And this has been a really interesting matchup since Handlock was initially very popular with the old pre-nerf Molten Giant deck. In that case, Paladin was not a popular class whatsoever. It's back before Paladin and Shaman really had their awakenings. But Equality Consecration and Aldor Peacekeeper have always been great tools against large minions and large boards like the Handlock has always played.
And in North Carolina, going with the Hydrologist here over Stonehill Defender, so a little bit off curve, but you saw how quickly they took that Repentance. They know exactly what's going on the other side of the board. There's a big minion on the horizon, but they don't play it just yet. They're going to hold on to this and try to find the right turn to do it. But this also helps them set up their Murloc War Leader for next turn, try to get some extra value from having Murlocs on board. But it doesn't play quite as strong to their mana curve. I wonder where the Stonehill Defender fits in nicely.
That's tough to say. I can absolutely see the Repentance coming down on the following turn with either the Stonehill or the Murloc War Leader. Going a Repentance into your opponent's turn 4 is very strong against Twilight Drake. So I think that's definitely something that they want to keep in mind. Whereas if they'd played it this turn, maybe Earthen Ring Farseer comes down. It's not quite as strong. Humongous Razor Leaf, however, that would have been a pretty good target.
Again, it can't attack, but now North Carolina, they know the jig's up. This is what they're dealing with, is now Faceless Shamblers, Defenders of Argus, Silence effects.
Big walls.
It's starting to get a little bit scary here. So Consecration, not a card that's going to be mass effect right now. And again, I think this is going back to what team can get the last threat out. This is a long road ahead of us until someone takes a distinct advantage.
It's going to be quite a game indeed. A lot of minion generation for North Carolina in the form of Stonehill Defender. Potentially, we could be seeing upwards of 3 Tyrion Ford Rings in this game. And then, of course, we saw at least the Trailblazer in the opening hand for Emi Saihai. So Who knows what can happen this game?
Can he afford to use the War Leader right now? Looks like just gonna.
I think it's all right. I mean, how aggressive do you really have to be in this matchup if you're the Paladin?
I would tend to say fairly aggressive. Again, they want Poly Montreal to have to use their stuff. But I was just about to mention that Repentance is great against Faceless Shambler, not so good versus Sun Fury Protector or against Defender of Argus. So that Sun Fury Protector could very well be the card that gets Poly Montreal out of what would have very likely been a sticky situation.
It absolutely could be. And of course, Poly Montreal cannot test for other secrets here. Noble Sacrifice, obviously the Razor Leaf can't attack. Redemption.
The only one I could test for would allow them to do nothing else this turn,
Yes.
which was Redemption or Getaway Kodo via the Shadow Bolt they have in hand.
So how much respect do you give to the Repentance?
Well, I think you give a lot, personally, but you get to squeeze in a life tap alongside of it if you play the Sun Fury Protector. You're starting to stop the damage that's on board, but again, if they lose the Humongous Razor Leaf, it means that they're not getting a big Shambler target as well. They'd have to wait till they find another. So they're going to risk the Shambler here instead, and that's going to become a 4-8 thanks to the Battle Cry, and a 4-1 thanks to Hydrologist.
Bit of a punish there, and we were saying the Paladin secrets are weak when you have to include them in your deck, but when you just get them off the back of a minion you can play on turn 2, very strong in these Paladin builds right now and paying off in spades against the Handlock.
Now their idea is that the Razor Leaf is still there. They have a second Shambler in hand, so they risk this one. If it pays off, it pays off. If it doesn't, take a little bit of damage, play the next one. So North Carolina, they have to start thinking about that. Now that they've seen Faceless Shambler right into their secret, they may be able to piece together, hey, is there another Faceless Shambler in hand? Should we start setting up for that? And then, how do they do that? Is it Aldor Peacekeeper? Do you sacrifice one of your minions? These are some tough calls.
There's a lot to think about in this matchup, and certainly it's one that I would wager these teams haven't seen all that much thus far. We're only a couple weeks into Ungoro. Of course, the meta is starting to settle, but Handlock, I don't think, is the Warlock deck that Jay Willie was expecting going into this game.
Well, so they kind of go in between. They use Consecration to wipe out the 4-1, and then they also put 2 damage on the Humongous Razor Leaf. So here, with Aldor Peacekeeper still in hand, if another Shambler comes down, they're able to simply run over it. So this is fighting against that potential. But now the Shadow Bolt comes out. That pulls a ton of power off board, and it's looking like Poly Montreal is eyeing a Doomsayer.
Well, I can certainly see why. You have 2 in hand, and they're not immediately challenged on board.
You lose your Razor Leaf is the thing. Like,
you do.
When does the Doomsayer come into effect in this matchup is sort of my thinking, is you need a Razor Leaf or an Ancient Watcher on board to make use out of it, but you also want to be able to wipe out your opponent's board and offset some of their largest turns. So one of the best turns to do that would just be going into North Carolina's turn 8 with Tyrion, with Ragnaros Lightlord, with Primordial Drake. If they can take that turn away and then steal the initiative from board, one big removal spell can give them what they need to start pushing. So this is still a long fight that these guys are in for. They're simply trying to just buy value at this point.
That's a great point. Doomsayer is a disruptor, and if you're able to put it down when the Paladin wants to play one of their large minions, you get initiative, maybe you can snowball from there, but certainly Humongous Razor Leaf is a threat on board in some ways, but you have Mountain Giants in deck, you have Twilight Drakes in deck, and those are eventually going to hit the board, at which case you will want to play the Doomsayers even less. So you kind of have to weigh, when is my best opportunity to get these down? Do I think I'll have time in the future when there will be a board that won't immediately challenge it? If not, Doomsayer soaks up 7 damage, so I can see this going both ways.
North Carolina whiffs on the Stonehill Defender. Not a strong pickup. Aldor Peacekeeper's trying to fight, but you can start to see where the card economy really matters. The lack of strong options from North Carolina has been hurting their turns. And here, Doomsayer would all but take everything away from North Carolina. We can see that they don't have an answer in hand, and obviously Poly Montreal doesn't know that. But if they're thinking about Curator in this spot, and that's the conclusion they land on, this Doomsayer is going to pull away the Curator turn potentially, because it would just die right into the Doomsayer, and then they're the ones who'll take the board. This is some really interesting stuff to look at if you're in Poly Montreal's spot.
And it's especially good because they have the Twilight Drake to follow it up, so they can develop post-Doomsayer turn, which is an absolute huge deal. Spellbreaker coming into hand makes perfect sense. You're playing Humongous Razorleaf. Silence on your opponent's Tyrion is great, but also silence on your 4/8 that can't attack is pretty good too.
Yeah, do you ever like look at this and go, you know what, True Silver Champion's really strong against us? Let's play both Doomsayers.
I think you need this board to die, and you need it to die quickly. And I don't think you're going to have many great Doomsayer turns going forward. I could absolutely see the reasoning for playing both.
Sunkeeper Tarim gets drawn, and I'm curious if that changes the way this board's going to go. Now they have a way to actually wipe out the opposing Doomsayer, and that is massive here. So the way this math is going to work out is they're going to take away some of their opponent's minions first and then rebuff them back up with that Sunkeeper Tarim. So they only get the one super efficient trade, but that is a lot of health and a lot of power that's added to board, and you keep yourself from getting Doomsayer. That's the big one here for North Carolina.
Plus, Sunkeeper Tarim himself is a 3/7 taunt. This is one of the cards coming out of Journey to Ungoro that I think was really underestimated and has found a perfect home in these styles of Paladin decks. And it is really, really good.
The damage is adding up here too. Poly Montreal is down to 9. And again, Reno Jackson's gone. You don't have that big reset my health button. You're working with what you got and maybe a couple of heal spells. This is looking really grim thanks to that Sunkeeper. They went for the Doomsayer. A double Doomsayer wouldn't have paid off anyway. But that one card changed the scope of this game.
I mean, Abyssal Enforcer came into hand. That clears off 3 of the minions on North Carolina's side, but then you're dead to True Silver Champion.
You're dead to a lot of stuff. Oh, it hurts. And North Carolina, I think this has turned the corner for them. They are not going to slow down from here. The Curator's going to give them a lot of gas. They're pushing 50% of Poly Montreal's remaining life. They draw Equality in case a big wall gets set up.
This is looking like it's going to be game for North Carolina.
Gentle Megasaur is also a beast. I didn't forget to mention that.
Yes, it is.
That is certainly a good one to draw off Curator.
Beasts, Murlocs, and Dragons. Oh my. I just remember Curator being revealed and thinking, what deck are you ever going to play these 3 tribes in? Apparently a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, does that buy them some time?
With Equality in hand.
That's the thing to look at. I mean, we see the hand, but Poly Montreal is going to try to piece this together and think about it. But they're done.
So many possibilities.
Earthen Ring heal to 9 taunt. That would help them live another turn potentially. I don't think you can do that though. That's just super weak on board. You're just never going to win if you do that. So they're going for the best play that they can set up. But that's all of their mana, and that is enough for North Carolina to secure themselves a game in set number 2. Set number 3 still going on at the moment, but the games in the 2 sets that have been played are now tied at 1 apiece.
Yes, 1 game each for set 1 and set 2. The game number 1 of set number 3 is still ongoing. I'm imagining a control mirror there. I don't know what's going down, but we will have results for you as soon as we get them. But now, it's all tied up 1 apiece.
Yeah, and there you just saw like the power of the synergy that Paladin has. The Murlocs all working together. Enough numbers, doesn't matter really what they are, will get the job done. And so when you have these very efficient early plays into those big buffs with War Leader, into the massive turnarounds with on power with Aldor Peacekeeper, and then Sunkeeper Tarim to completely dominate that board. It's just a fantastic deck to be using right now.
Yeah, the Paladin isn't trying to do anything really fancy. It's just putting strong minions on board, curving out very well, and it got the job done this time. So let's take a look at our score so far in set number 1. We have a win for Poly Montreal, and in set number 2, Jay Willie took it with the Paladin over Emmy Sci-High, so we are all tied up. Of course, it is the first team to win 2 of these sets will take the match. So it is best of 3s within a big best of 3. Still game number 1 in set number 3 ongoing between Brio and Crusher 99.
Sounds like it could be a Shaman mirror to me. I know those elemental Shaman games can go for quite a while.
Casted one with Rob in Global Games just a few days ago, 45 minutes long.
Woo.
The first 35 minutes pretty much nothing happened. They could have been nullified. I don't think anybody hit face until like turn 18.
You got to make those totems. It's a big facet. But
it was a marathon.
This is kind of what I was hoping for coming into this, is to really test the players to their maximum ability. I mean, can they hold it together this long across 3 games, still working together, new format, different style of play than they're used to? This is absolutely the best way it could go for me.
I mean, change has been the name of the game for the Tespa Collegiate Series. And here you can see all of the community that came out for this tournament. Of course, we are live at the Esports Arena in Santa Ana, California. I haven't gotten a chance to get down there myself and meet some of these people, but I am looking forward to it later on today. But before then, we are going to have game number 2 of set number 1, Frank Shadow versus Sundance. We saw Poly Montreal take a win with the Taunt Warrior, and now we have Frank Shadow on the Paladin and Sundance Quest Rogue.
Yeah, Quest Rogue has been a very interesting deck. I'd say this is probably the deck that's gone through the most small changes since its introduction. Rogue Quest, you have to play 4 minions of the same name, and play is the key word there.
Yes.
It's not summon 4, it's actually play 4. You have to pay the cost from hand to do that. So if you do that, you get a 5-mana card that turns all of your minions into 5/5s for the rest of the game. And there's no way your opponent can interact with that effectively. So their goal is to have Shadow Steps, Youthful Brewmasters, Gadgets, and Ferryman, and return the same minion to their hand multiple times and get it active. That's how you get the quest. They have oftentimes a lot of charge damage in the deck, so Stone Tusk Boar makes an appearance in here, just becomes a 5/5 and starts attacking. Sounds like a great 1-mana card afterwards. And it's very difficult for Poly Montreal to really offset that. You know, one of the most successful ways I've seen for Paladin to fight against this is simply get a lot of minions on board and start attacking. They have very little early action right now, and their deck is centered around that Murloc synergy in the early game. If they don't have that, it gives North Carolina a lot of time to assemble the combo.
Absolutely. The big killer for the Quest Rogue is aggression. Pirate Warrior, namely, just absolutely puts this deck down. And the Paladin can do a fantastic job of it as well, but with this opening hand, it's just not what they needed here. They would have much rather had Hydrologist, Vilefin Inquisitor, Murloc War Leader, not what they were hoping to see here to really try and close out this game very quickly.
Yeah, and Stampede and Kodo being added. You see Ivory Knight as well. This is a much heavier looking value deck than what we saw from North Carolina in the previous game. So at this point, I'm really fearing for their chances. Just, again, North Carolina has so much time to get this done. And this is one of the decks where drawing patches, not the worst thing in the world. All they're really looking for is to bounce the same minion a couple times. So they're, one more Shadow Step, one more Firefly, one more Youthful Brewmaster or Gadgets and Ferryman. Those are their big payoff cards right now.
Yeah, Glacial Shard actually is one of the most obnoxious cards in this deck because that's the way that the Rogue really shuts down early aggression. You play Glacial Shard, bounce it, freeze 2 minions, or freeze a minion in face. It's surprisingly the only stability they really have in the early game, and it is an absolute nuisance, but won't even be necessary here because Frank Shadow's hand is so heavy in the early game.
Yeah, now that being said, they're not under pressure themselves just yet. So they do have some big ones following this up and some wonderful options on their Stonehill. I imagine Sunkeeper Tarim is actually the take here. It's one of the few ways to actually interact with the opposing Rogue Quest, other than just step by step and the way the preparation looks. It actually will change the 5/5s down to 3/3s.
Yes.
So you can either have an opportunity to push against your opponent or to simply clear out their board.
It's absolutely a great point. Whether or not Poly Montreal will have enough time at that point remains yet to be seen, but I think the Tarim there was definitely the correct pick.
It's also a great pickup here for North Carolina on the Novice Engineer. This is oftentimes in slower matchups the one that you want to be bouncing again and again because it finds you that last piece, and at the same time, it's just drawing into your deck so that you have more stuff to do. They're going to focus on Firefly here, though, and I don't blame them for that either. It's producing an extra minion in their hand, and in this matchup, a lot of times it comes down to just how many minions do you have to play on board. They can get swept out by Equality. They can get Sunkeeper Tarim'd. A lot of times just a lot of taunts in the way, and then a Consecration can deliver that final blow. So they're focusing more on just having more minions than they are on actually finding more cards.
It's a great point. One of the ways that the Rogue can potentially lose this game in the late game is if they run out of minions. Their hand has nothing in it because they go all in very early, get swept by a board clear, and then draw dead. So you usually want to bounce back minions that have Battle Cry, Swashbuckler, Glacial Shard, Novice Engineer. In this case, Firefly is also a fantastic option because of those Flame Elementals. It gives you more reload after you play the Crystal Core.
Yeah, 1-0 in this set here for Poly Montreal. If they manage to win this game, set number 1's done. They have that one in the books. So North Carolina, they are fighting for this first set here, and that's a Gadgets and Ferryman. And so now they can start getting this quest active. They have enough to play Firefly or Flame Elemental 4 times.
I don't think anybody saw this quest being completed quite so quickly once it was released, but with Gadgets and Ferryman, Shadow Step, and Brewmaster, it is absolutely a breakneck pace deck type. Unfortunately, no preparation in hand, so turn 5 will likely be entirely committed to Crystal Core. So they're hoping to build up as big of a board now as they possibly can, because once Crystal Core is played, all minions on board do become 5/5s.
All your minions.
Yes,
Yeah.
not your opponent's minions. That would not be quite as good.
Yeah, that would be awful.
I don't think that is a card that people would want to play in that case.
Unless they're all 10-10s.
If your minions are 10/10s and your opponents are 5/5s, maybe.
Glacial Shard even going to hit here. And then the Shadow Step on the Firefly. Quest is now active. They have 4 minions online. Poly Montreal is in a heap of trouble.
Unfortunately, that's just the way this quest rogue works. It's very hit or miss. If you get a very weak start, then there's just not much they can do. It's like they're playing their own game up until they complete the quest. You might as well swap in this game for a game of solitaire, and once they finish that one up, quest is online, then the real game begins, and they're hitting face as much as possible.
Yeah, that's why the pressure is so important, is you have to be able to put this deck in a tough spot where that time frame is concerned, either being able to run over their minions to make the turn they actually play quest a lot weaker, or number 2, just threaten to kill them the turn they're going into quest. Those are the two, in my experience, most effective ways to combat that. And so Stampeding Kodo going to help alleviate the pressure, but Firefly being played 4 times was the big one here. It was a lot cheaper for them in terms of their mana pool to get that done, and now they have 4 extra, what will be 1 mana 5/5s in their hand. This is a devastating turn.
Absolutely destructive, and the only thing that Poly Montreal could really be hoping for here would be a quality Consecration or a quality Pyro in hand. They have none of those cards. So permanent 5/5s coming from North Carolina, and no way really for Poly Montreal to deal with them.
Yeah, the only question here for North Carolina is how the combat works. Do they feel like they want to trade, or do they want to push the damage onto Poly Montreal, hoping they have to trade back, and as a result, just get free 5 damage out of that? How quickly can they close in this spot? The one thing to look at is that their hand is very linear. It is just a lot of 5/5s. So from their perspective, if Poly Montreal can sweep the first board of 5/5s, can they then Sunkeeper the next wave and start playing a lot of big taunts in the way, and suddenly your 5/5s aren't getting the job done? That's their one worry.
If you have a quality Consecration or quality Pyro on the first large board, tear them on the second one, eventually, Consecration, there's a second equality in deck. Maybe the Rogue here still has a chance to lose. But of course, we have caster vision. We know exactly what's in hand for Poly Montreal, and it's a lot of clunky minions and no removal at this point.
Well, Double Sunkeeper does do an interesting job of fighting this. They got a Sunkeeper from a Stonehill Defender.
That's true.
Right now, that will combat the board. However, again, there's just a ton of minions in North Carolina's hand. That's the second Sunkeeper's for. Can you realistically just fight off enough of these? Can you get enough time?
If you put down the Sunkeeper that you naturally have in your deck, don't reveal what card you got off of Stonehill Defender, maybe North Carolina feels the need to empty their hand next turn. They have 6 mana they can play, 4 1-drops and a Bilefin Tidehunter. Then, if you have second Sunkeeper Tarim, surprise, maybe you can stabilize from there. It's going to be tough, though.
It starts with a weak Sunkeeper, but
you need to sort of entice your opponent to advance on the board. It's like baiting a brawl. You need to bait all of these minions.
Yeah, well, this is going to be tough to do. There's a charge minion in hand. They have more ways to draw. Bilefin Tidehunter's producing 2 5/5s for its single card. North Carolina They're going to start with just a draw here and try to get as much information as they can and then evaluate. This is still a long road if Poly Montreal is going to stabilize at all.
And of course, this is only set number 1, so Frank Shadow and Poly Montreal did take game number 1 with their Warrior in this first set. However, North Carolina got the first win in set number 2. We're still waiting on game number 1 for set number 3. It is the first team to take 2 of these sets that wins this match. Best of 3 within a best of 3. It's best of 3-ception. We are just in set number 1 right now.
Those are some big flame elementals.
I like 1 mana 5/5s. What do you think?
Look at this. They're going to hang on to their charge here and just sacrifice the 3/3s and use their hero power. This is actually really brilliant from North Carolina. They're using as few resources as possible to answer the board, and now they have a giant board built against North Carolina. They're actually threatening lethal from hand in this spot by not using the charge minion, and it is a little bit hidden. You know, Poly Montreal, they're always going to think about charge damage, but are they going to account for 2 of those effects? You know, this Sunkeeper doesn't look like it's big enough to get the job done. North Carolina looks like they accounted for a second Sunkeeper off the Stonehill, too.
All the refill in hand. I think maybe in this case more you want to be concerned about a quality consecration. You never need to overextend onto the board. Second Sunkeeper may not be on their mind, but certainly the Paladin has efficient removal that North Carolina is considering. It just happened to be Sunkeeper Tarim in this case.
So now they know that only a quality plus another damage spell to the board is going to clear this out. They don't have lethal quite represented, but it's a lot of damage being pieced together here.
Let's see, you have 10 from hand with the Stone Tusk Boar and the patches. Novice Engineer could potentially pick you up yet another charge in the form of second Boar or South Sea Deckhand.
Ferryman, too.
Absolutely, Ferryman as well.
15 just from hand.
15 from hand. If you run 2 minions plus weapon into the Tarim, then that's 18 with the remaining 3 on board.
Yeah, they're operating in 5s right now, so that 3 damage I think would honestly likely trade off in a situation like this. Just simply because you would take 2 dagger swings for it to make that up. And
25 divided by 5.
Prep is no use at this point. That is very likely to be a dead draw. Like, sometimes Vanish has appeared in this deck as well.
That's true.
You can prep Vanish, return all the charges to hand, and then just replay them again. But here, 3 minions on board plus the 2 charges is enough to end this. And so now that they've seen both Sunkeepers, they are free to put a lot more on board. Poly Montreal, I believe, has 0 outs in this spot.
Okay, Eldor Peacekeeper takes 4 damage off the board. You don't have enough mana to Spike Ridge Steed afterwards, however, so is it better to just Hero Power Spike Ridge Steed?
Well, I think that is the one way that they actually stay alive through 3 charge effects is Spike Ridge Steed.
It makes your
It would take 3 hits
Hero
of minions.
Power a 3/7.
Yeah, 3/7 taunt, and
then
when
you
it
get
dies,
the 2/6 Death Rattle.
That's right. You get a 2/6 taunt when it dies. So that would require 2 minion attacks from North Carolina to clear the first body, and then the minion attack plus hero power to clear the second body. So
Which would leave them with 15.
That's right. So they're going to go with another Sunkeeper here. I'm sorry, another Stonehill here, hoping for another Sunkeeper. And their goal was to simply use Eldor Peacekeeper plus this body to stave off the damage. That wouldn't be enough. Maybe Fen Creeper buys them some more time, but now at this point, North Carolina is just getting way too much value from their minions.
Just not having had any of those removal combo pieces in hand up until this point. There's no singular draw that could keep them in the game. This is
That's 25.
going to be it.
Yeah, they spotted it right away, too.
North
10 from there,
Carolina,
50 from
really
hand.
sharp guys.
So now, in set number 1, it's tied at 1 game each. The next game that's won by either team will close set number 1. It is game, trying to win 2 of those. In the set, trying to win 2 of those. And then
Then you
that's
get the match.
So set number 1 tied at 1 game apiece. In set number 2, North Carolina is up a game.
And importantly, North Carolina is also up a game in set number 3. We'll see exactly how that went down, but we did get word that Crusher 99 in North Carolina on the Shaman did defeat Brio and Poly Montreal on their Hunter in that marathon of a game number 1 for set number 3. So that one did happen off stream. We did not get to see it, but that is ultimately how it went down. So now advantages for North Carolina all around.
That's right, and that's how quickly it changes from just the one game being won in the first one. It's best of 3s across the board. You get one opportunity to play your deck, win or lose with it, and that often means that you'll see 9 classes played on each side at some point if you go to those game 3s, and that is a big test to their ability to play Hearthstone. This isn't, you show up and you play Shaman, you're really good at Shaman, you win some Shaman games. This is, you're going to have to play Warlock, you're going to have to play Priest, you're going to have to play Hunter. How much practice have they had with all 9 classes?
There hasn't been a lot of time since Ngoro has been released, so it remains yet to be seen. But here we have the scores thus far. 1-1 in set number 1, and then advantages to North Carolina in both sets number 2 and 3. Crusher 99 did get a win with the Shaman over Brio's Hunter, and then Jay Willie with the Paladin over Emi Sai High's Handlock Warlock. It is important to note, classes with the red circle around them are out of play. You cannot replay classes that you lost with. It's not traditional Conquest. So the final game in set number 1 is going to be Frank Shadow on the Rogue against Sundance on the Hunter.
Yeah, we're going to go into set number 3, game 2. Before we get into that, though, and again, these guys have been on broadcast and playing a tournament all together throughout this. We want to make sure that everybody get some time on the main stage here and get to see what everybody is working with. We get to see more classes this way and see if maybe they've made any adaptations to anything, or if they're going with the strategies that are starting to become known within the community. A lot of those ideas just simply get shared and they make their way around. A lot of them are just strong.
When you don't have that much time to develop your own decks and your own strategies, sometimes you just need to learn from your community and really take what works best. So here we see set number 3. Brio dropped game number 1 with the Hunter, and now it's going to be the Shaman and the Druid that Poly Montreal needs to win with in this set if they want to take it. Crusher 99 needs to get a win with either the Druid or the Priest.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. I would have liked to see that Shaman deck. If it took the game that long with Hunter, I kind of also want to see the Hunter deck in that case, too.
Elemental Shaman goes long every time. Hunter, not quite as much, so I am kind of interested to see maybe how that one went down. But I would expect it to be a control Shaman. And here we can see the crowd once again live from the Esports Arena in Santa Ana, California. Of course, our 2 teams up on the big stage. All right, so it's going to be a Jade Elemental Shaman for Poly Montreal and North Carolina on their Druid. Set number 3, game number 2. Game 1 went to North Carolina.
Yeah, looking like it's going to be that Jade Elemental thing. Firefly's still a fine card, but the Jade package really just stayed in Shaman. The cards are just good. Jade Lightning puts a body on board and deals 4 damage. Jade Claws puts a body on board, and eventually it deals 4 damage. They're just strong cards. A lot of times, Poly Montreal is going to play a little bit differently if elementals are in the deck. The prerequisite to the major elemental effects is that you had to have played an elemental on the previous turn. That at times means that Firefly won't be played immediately. It'll often mean that Flame Elemental is going to stick in hand right up until that key turn. So a lot of off play that you'll see from them at times, just simply taking into account that effect. And for Crusher 99 in North Carolina, this Druid deck is not subtle. This is trying to get a lot of minions on board and use cards like Power of the Wild and Mark of the Lotus to buff up all those small minions and produce a lot of damage. If their board gets swept, a lot of times you find Bittertide Hydra in here just to be a giant minion afterwards, or Living Mana to recreate the same position you were just in. Living Mana is going to take all your mana away, but it's going to give you a 2/2 for each one of those that happens, and when those 2/2s die, you get your mana back. So the goal is to take advantage of those wide buff effects like Power of the Wild, like Mark Lotus, like Savage Roar.
Yep, we actually saw an aggro Druid in the first match of the day, which Shawnee State did win, and I believe it killed the opponent by like turn 5, turn 6. It's a very fast deck. The question here will be, does the Shaman deck have enough to combat the early game coming from the aggro Druid?
And it looks like North Carolina is just going to get rowdy right away. They play the Bloodsail Corsair and get patches out of their deck. Now, if they knew Poly Montreal had Jade Claws, they might have second-guessed this. But right away, they get 4 power on board, but it costs them 2 cards, and now they no longer have the utility of destroying a Jade Claw potentially. But how important is that? I'd say the major facet of their deck is just simply getting damage and minions on board, start closing in towards that victory. This is a very all-in style of strategy.
Jade Claws is going to kill the Druid's minions, and in that case, that's more damage to face that the Druid needs to get to secure the win. So I don't think you're too unhappy about that. And really just a blistering fast start from the Druid. Of course, they operate best when Innervate is in hand, so here suffering a little bit from that, but all around it's looking like a fairly decent start from the Druid deck. Double Maelstrom Portal in hand for Poly Montreal, however, that's going to be really effective in this matchup as well.
Well, just plus the Jade Claws. They just get a lot of work done. For the Druid, their major pushes come from having presence on board. It's not a big combo damage in one turn. They're not going to ramp up into giant minions at some point. Eventually, they just start drawing some weak cards, and that's why Living Mana has found such a home in this. It's just one card that produces a lot. But every single time their minions get chipped away a bit, that's less long-term damage. That's the thing to look out for. Can Poly Montreal keep the board under some sort of control?
It's looking like they're going to have a good shot. The Elemental Shamans play a reasonable amount of taunts. Of course, Stoneclaw Totem is always active, is always a possibility off of the hero power. Not a lot of health gain unless you count Columos Primal Lord, which can heal you for 12. And it's unlikely that we get to that point in the game and the Druid really still has a chance if the Shaman is alive then.
And this is the kind of play that makes me wonder about their turn 1 Bloodsail Corsair, is that oftentimes it's not necessarily just a reckless all-in that you take. You have to time it to some degree. So when they played Bloodsail Corsair and they sacrificed Jade Claws being a strong card against them, what ends up happening now is they have to slow that down a little bit. They have to start hero powering away these Jade minions and trying to keep their minions alive. They are getting a damage source as a result of their efforts, but could they have gotten more is my question.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I'm wondering myself. Of course, they went Bloodsail into Coin and the Mark of the Lotus. It looked like for turn 2, maybe they were hoping, something sticks. You can Mark of Yasharaj. You don't get the draw because neither of the minions were beasts. Power of the Wild for buff was also an option, but do you really want to be using those valuable AoE buff cards on just 2 minions on your board? Is that good enough?
There's definitely merit to it. It's just the fact that you had to slow down so much versus Jade Claws. It looked like something that maybe they didn't have in mind when they played the Bloodsail Corsair. This looks like Poly Montreal's going to go for Maelstrom Portal. Of course, they're overloaded this turn and starts to turn that board around just a little bit.
Well, if
it's a good one.
The early game removal from Poly Montreal wasn't enough of a nuisance, here's a 1-3 taunt. Go ahead, deal with it.
Yeah, and this is really where North Carolina starts to find a little bit more of that value, and they have a bit of a power spike. Being able to mark a Yasharaj, a beast, make it bigger, draw a card, that's about where the kinds of cards you need are. Because again, there's a lot of low-costed cards in here, and eventually they just don't have the right push for it. So I think they're still in fine shape, but Poly Montreal has a lot of big pickups that could easily dominate this kind of position. Jade Lightning really comes to mind.
Yeah, Jade Lightning would be fantastic here to just start cutting down this board and going with Power of the Wild instead of Mark of Yasharaj here.
Yeah, they simply want to just make both of these a threat and also be a little bit stronger to some of the weaker AoE cards that are in there, like another Maelstrom Portal or even Jade Claws. It would require the minion plus the attack to get that done. And then Poly Montreal draws Lava Burst, and that's a really interesting pickup because thus far we haven't really seen anything that would indicate this is a more aggressive deck. So it's either a call to say, you know what, we need a removal spell, but we also need burst damage, or maybe it's a signal they just happen to draw their reactive cards so far.
Yeah, it's definitely not an inclusion we're used to seeing in Jade Elemental builds. Usually there is actually just no burn. They don't play Lightning Bolt, they don't play Lava Burst. Jade Lightning is about all it is. I can absolutely see where one copy of Lava Burst would be a likely inclusion, so I wouldn't go all in and say that this is just an aggressive Shaman yet. But it very well could be.
I mean, that works with the Firefly.
It does. If you still want to play, Blaze Caller is 5 damage to face. 4 mana 7/7s are still really strong. I don't know. Maybe it's possible that Poly Montreal is doing something a little bit different. How about Dust Devil?
Well, it's going to get hero power down here, but at this point, North Carolina has just been chewed apart where their hand is concerned. They never found the right synergy, and they spent their cards fairly liberally. Not really much conservation involved, and I think this is going to be the spot where Poly Montreal really starts turning the corner. The game is not going at the pace that North Carolina wants it to right now.
Well, importantly, Savage Roar was drawn, and Living Mana will be online if North Carolina draws it going forward. So
Oh,
that
wow.
potentially could be a way that they can close out this game.
This is
Bitter
aggro
Tide
shaman.
Hydra. This is aggro elemental Jade
No,
Hydra
no,
shaman.
there is no elemental. That is,
Just Firefly.
it's a 1/2 that makes a 1/2, is what that is. It helps you with Flame Tongue Totem. It helps you fight for board with Maelstrom Portal. That is a big surprise to me because the goal of this deck is just play big minions in a row and hope they connect. Flame Wreath Faceless oftentimes found in here, and when you play a Flame Wreath, it gets killed, and then you play a Bitter Tide Hydra. How much removal does your opponent usually have in their deck? Is sort
Probably
of the
not
thought.
enough for 2 copies each of those, and then double Lava Burst, of course, Lightning Bolt likely present. Jade Lightning, of course, is also burst from hand. So this is really interesting. This is not what we were expecting Poly Montreal to have, and in fact, it's an aggro mirror.
Yeah, Bitter Tide Hydra can definitely be a little bit risky in this matchup. You know, say you play Bitter Tide and you run right into living mana, you're like, uh-oh. That's a lot of 3-power guys on board suddenly.
Yeah. It's a natural power of the wild to all of those treants.
Yeah, so Poly Montreal down to 16, but honestly, that is fairly safe from their perspective. Their nightmare cards to see right now is quite literally living mana, and to a lesser degree, Bitter Tide Hydra because they have the Stoneclaw in the way. But drawing the Bluegill Warrior, that likely signals that Finja is also in the deck. It's trying to get Murloc War Leaders and Bluegill Warriors from the effect of when it kills a minion. Just get extra stuff on board and deal more damage. The combo's great with Savage Roar, and it's just a great way to get a wide board presence in case you've lost it early.
Well, the fact that this is aggro shaman really changes a lot of where my mind was going regarding this matchup. If we were thinking, oh, mid-range elemental, Lightning Storm's definitely in the build. Columos is going to be your latest game card, but now I doubt that Poly Montreal has Lightning Storm in the deck, meaning that living mana would be even more destructive.
Yeah, it pretty much, I would imagine, it's topping out at about Eye of Blackpaw. You know, it's tough to play Bitter Tide Hydra and then also play a late game. So in Poly Montreal's spot, the fact that their North Carolina's turn was Direwolf Alpha Go, I think this is the go-ahead for them to just play whatever they want and start attacking. It's going to be tough for North Carolina to actually get out of this situation.
Well, swipe's a start. Swipe face, hit face, Bluegill. Puts them down to...
I don't know if you can afford to play the Bluegill is all.
Well, if you play the Bluegill, it deals 3 because of the Direwolf, so you're doing 4, 6, 9.
What to do?
You couple it with Savage Roar maybe. Like maybe they have to like just hope they draw
Yeah,
Finja,
maybe.
get a Finja activation, and then play Bluegill and Savage Roar out of that. I mean, Savage Roar is where their closer is seated right now.
We've even seen, oh goodness, Shapeshifter in these decks just for the stealth 5/3.
Do you potentially swipe the 3/3 to buy more time?
You're still at 27. The board's not
It'll
that
quickly
threatening, but Aya is always an issue.
it'll quickly get out of hand. And I'm curious if North Carolina even knows that this is aggressive right now. I mean, so far they've seen Jade cards, 2 Maelstrom portals. Nothing really indicates that there's Lava Burst, Flame with Faceless, Bitter Tide Hydra in the opposing hand. You know, from their perspective, they may feel like they just need to go as quickly as possible in this spot. There's a lot of things to account for here, and the fact that the information's hidden makes it that much harder. Damage to face, though, that's the one that Poly Montreal did not want to see.
Well, this is actually pretty decent for North Carolina. They hold on to the Bluegill, meaning they can combine that with the Savage
boy.
Roar. Very wise. Thing from below, however,
Oh boy.
that's going to put a big kink in their plans.
They are closing in very close to ending the game. It was Bluegill Savage Roar Hero Power is 7 damage. That's 2 off lethal from Poly Montreal. And this has been their game plan, find that extra 2 damage. Suddenly, Thing from Below hits the board, and that is a large extension of life, plus it's an additional clock.
Extension of life, additional clock, removal on minions because you've seen one swipe. Likely the only other form of removal is second swipe, maybe a pair of Wraths in the deck. And there's another Stoneclaw Totem.
It's more damage in the way. That's effectively 7 extra life for Poly Montreal. This is bad news if you're North Carolina spot. Now, they are up a game in this set.
Important to note, yes.
So if Poly Montreal is able to close from here, it's game number 3 in set number 3. So that possibility is growing nearer and nearer.
Match number 1 of the day went all the way down to the 3rd set, third
boy.
game.
That's a huge draw.
That's probably all over from there.
That is a huge draw.
Well, you can play that along with Flame Wreath Faceless this turn and simply try to kill your opponent on the next turn.
Sounds good.
Then game over from here.
I like killing the opponent on the next turn.
Yeah, I believe you once told me that somebody once told you that if you can set up a 2-turn lethal, it's probably right.
Yeah, that was 2014 World Champion Firebat.
Wise guy indeed. I would tend to listen to him.
What does Poly Montreal lose to in this spot, I wonder? Yeah, me too, Thrall.
Me 3 Thrall. I mean, the only charger they have in
Me
deck
4
is...
Thrall.
Okay, don't get ahead of yourself here, Admirable. The only other charge they have would be, second Bluegill Warrior, obviously.
Well, they get a
Possibly
refund.
Shapeshifter for charge.
They get a refund on their damage here when they trade in. They push 10 into 8, but they get 6 to face out of it, and they eliminate the 8/8 possibility. And one thing from below is enough. That's definitely not enough, and that's one more game for Poly Montreal. So set number 3 is now going to get tied up at 1 game apiece. The next game in that one is going to decide that first set.
Set number 1 is all tied up as well. Set number 2, 1 game in favor of North Carolina. These sets are certainly keeping us on our toes, and both of these teams looking very evenly matched here, but this one did go over to Poly Montreal in the favor of the aggressive Shaman build. Aggro Shaman isn't something we've been seeing a lot of, but it looked very strong there.
Well, it just speaks to the power of Jade Claws and Maelstrom Portal. Those are very flexible cards that produce a lot of value. You're getting a minion out of something, and you're getting an effect out of something. Those tend to be the stronger cards in the game.
Absolutely. Spirit Claws completely gone right now. Jade Claws is the name of the game in Aggressive Shaman. And let's check in on exactly how these sets are going. Like we said, 1-1 in both set number 1 and set number 3. Set number 2 is in favor of Jay Willie and North Carolina with the Paladin win over the Handlock Warlock. But these are still anybody's sets.
That's right. We're gonna head into set number 2 next. So it's set point for North Carolina in that one. And Poly Montreal is going to need 2 straight to take that. So with Warlock and Mage left versus Mage and Priest, I'm curious if North Carolina went with the same idea on their Warlock. We saw in the first match that it was actually Zoo, where Pterodax was able to get the job done, become untargetable versus a Mage, and really punish the fact that it's spells that target single things at a time, trying to get that job done. That was a great setup for them, and that card's so powerful in the right situation. It's terrifying to play against. But maybe they're on the handlock like Poly Montreal was.
It's very possible. And here we can see, of course, the excited audience once again cheering on both of these teams. What a road it has been for them to get all the way to this point. Poly Montreal, of course, hailing from Montreal, but 2 of the players on the team actually originally from France. So what a journey to make it all the way from their homes to Montreal to go to school and now California to play Hearthstone of all things.
Yeah, as Brio was telling us about how it's a small island that belongs to France that he came from. And I think he said there's like 600 people that live on the island. So when he's all grown up, little Brio decided he wanted to go to university, and now he attends a school with 10 times the amount of people that his island had.
Talk about a big change. And here we have a Mage Mirror, MSI High, and Jay Willie. It's looking like an aggressive tempo style for North Carolina, likely still with some freezes, but definitely wanting to kill your opponent much quicker. From MSI High, it looks like we might just be seeing one of the more traditional freeze mages right now.
Yeah, this mage deck with the Mana Worms that North Carolina is playing, this is a really interesting one. Is in set number 2 right now, it is a 1-game advantage for North Carolina. We're only looking at the second set right now with the scores on your screen. I've seen a lot of variation in Mage thus far. I've seen some builds that are more dedicated to the traditional tempo style, where just depending on the situation was going to show you how you should use your tools. But I've been seeing some burn-based freeze mages come in, where they try to get a lot of damage early out of their minions, and then they simply follow up with a freeze mage style plan afterwards, using ice blocks and just card draw with Cold Light Oracle and then burn spells. They're using the ice blocks simply to unlock more mana on the following turn. It's a really, really interesting build. But in this matchup, I'm curious how well it does, because Poly Montreal, they're going to have cards that are dedicated to reacting to minions on board. They're going to have Doomsayers. They're going to have Blizzards in their deck. They're going to have Flame Strikes to wipe out boards. And they have a lot of burn in their own right. So how much damage are those early minions worth in a matchup like this.
And if the early minions aren't worth much, what are you sacrificing to put them in your deck? In this case, it's probably more board freezes, but if you're up against a traditional freeze mage, which has no real minion combat, does that even matter?
Yeah, and that Novice Engineer plus the Ice Block is gonna tell us a big story there. They are very reliant on getting some minion damage, then following up with big burn. So the big thing to look out for Poly Montreal is not only keeping the minions at bay, but also keeping their hand size under some semblance of control. If they have too many cards in hand, Cold Light Oracle can potentially burn a key piece and be no liability to North Carolina at that point. So I would tend to think they're going to use their cards fairly liberally to make sure they're not taking damage, because that's what they're thinking when they see that Novice Engineer. For North Carolina, where does this push begin again? Is it just Mana Worm and Hero Power this turn?
It's very possible. Also, Mana Worm and Arcanologist that would be a second option. Arcanologist is really one of the reasons that a deck like this Mage for North Carolina can even exist, because Ice Block, it would be such a hindrance if you were going for more of an aggressive style Mage with early minion aggression. But because you have Arcanologist, you get the blocks for free. You're essentially thinning your deck and getting that guaranteed extra turn to be able to Fireball later on. Maybe Pyroblast, Archmage Antonidas.
Well, their hand is lacking some key pieces, it looks like. Namely, card draw and burn spells. Poly Montreal, the first Doomsayer, gave them some great tempo on board, and North Carolina are going to put that to the test again. 2 more minions, say, which one do you want to kill in this spot? But Poly Montreal has got a lot of ways to answer what can happen in these coming turns. The Ice Barrier plus Medivh's Valet can kill a minion. The second Doomsayer can emulate the same board it just did.
Yeah, well, you've got Doomsayer
removal.
Frost Nova now as well, which is your guaranteed clear, assuming that your opponent doesn't have Fireball in hand. So a lot of options here for Poly Montreal, and just them having to decide what's the way that we really want to choose to clear this board. An abundance of options right now.
And honestly, that kind of has to be North Carolina's game plan, is they're going to have to make a sacrifice somewhere in order to start getting some damage done. That's, to me, where Ice Barrier makes a big difference in this matchup. It is a lot harder to get through minion damage if they're low-power minions, they get in one attack, and then they get froze to death.
Well, it's even risky to attack into a secret if you're North Carolina, because if it is Ice Barrier and you can't push 8 minion damage, well, then you've essentially healed your opponent.
Right.
So
it's a really tricky spot that I often see a lot of players make the mistake against, is in a matchup where they're more reliant on simply surviving burst damage by healing through it and quite literally waiting their opponent out in fatigue. The extra life that they can generate for their opponents via one single attack to Ice Barrier is a really tricky thing to play around. It requires having the experience in the matchup and understanding what your game plan is.
experience in any of these matchups is difficult to have accomplished at this point. We're still very early on into a new meta, and these decks are constantly evolving. Mage at the beginning of Ungoro, Quest Mage, was very, very popular, but now it is all freeze.
North Carolina's hand, that helps a lot, but their
Yes,
hand
it
was
does.
looking awfully miserable.
Abysmal. Still not shaping up to be very good. Frost Novas are going to not do much at all against Poly Montreal. Just not a lot of minion combat in Freeze Mage.
They're gonna pretty much do nothing. Poly Montreal's game plan with their minions is typically to fight for board and maybe chip away if you get the opportunity. It's not a central focus to their win condition. Medivh's Valet, perhaps the one caveat to that, because it's 3 damage from hand when you have a secret. So that is something to consider.
And then you have Arcanologist, of course, but you don't run that because it's potentially 2 damage to face. You run it because it pulls Ice Barrier and Ice Block from your deck, which, you know, Freeze Mage pre-Ungoro struggled a lot of the time with drawing the secrets it needed.
It's like a Crocolisk, too. It's a Crocolologist.
Crocolologist.
Yep.
I like it.
There's
Wait,
not
Arcane Missiles?
it's a minion burn deck. You're reliant on your early game tempo. I mean, this deck wants to get online with Mana Worm and deliver a punch to 1 health minions and then just push through.
Yeah, I guess it would perform very well against Hunter in that case.
Yeah, this was the latest development of the deck I'd seen, but it can really struggle when these kinds of hands crop up. I would tend to say that Freeze Mage, after watching this, doesn't seem like the best matchup for it.
Well, no barriers in deck. As you can see, the Arcanologist did not pull anything there with both blocks already in hand.
Yeah, that gives Poly Montreal some information here too. I don't think they're going to assume it's just one ice block in the deck, because this deck relies on having multiple turns of mana to unlock burn spells. So for Poly Montreal, they now know that 2 of the cards in hand for North Carolina are ice blocks. That's 3 cards they're operating on.
Not to mention North Carolina took the risk that Poly Montreal had an ice block activated. Turned out to be barrier, and now Poly Montreal gained 7 health. They're back up to 32.
They're going to have to get minions through this game, is what it boils down to. I mean, their hand is not giving them the liberty of waiting around. They're living on a prayer at this point.
I just don't know if it'll be possible. Both Mana Worms are gone. One Sorcerer's Apprentice is gone. First Arcanologist is gone. What really do they have that's going to provide minion damage in this case?
Well, 2 ice blocks get drawn right away. So that punishes the Arcanologist in hand. So the thing I'm thinking about for North Carolina, a big one would be like either Primordial Glyph into a lot of like Kabbalist Tome style of effects and card generation there, or number 2 would be an Archmage Antonidas. Something like that could also be a big benefit for them, but this is a low value Primordial Glyph here. 3rd ice block is, I think, likely to be their best option, but how good is that at this point?
Well, Mirror Entity's a liability because likely Doomsayer is coming down for your opponent at some point. Cone of Cold is a dead card in hand, so yeah, it's got to be block, but...
I could see Mirror Entity, but there's that risk of Doomsayer.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you hit a Loot Hoarder. Maybe you hit an Acolyte of Pain.
That's the thing. You could definitely hit those, and maybe you just have to risk it and go, wow, maybe we can get them to play Archmage Antonidas or Alex Straza into this. Deliver some damage that way.
Thinking that 1 extra turn from Ice Block probably won't change anything. I don't blame them.
And this is how little concern they have for board value at this point. It has Medea's Valet to face and then start attacking. They know these minions are likely to die anyway. They want to take every point of damage they can get. No investing here for North Carolina. It is very all-in and very grim looking.
Yeah, absolutely. Poly Montreal, 2 Frost Novas, 2 Blizzards in deck. North Carolina knows that these minions are getting removed or they're getting permanently frozen, so it doesn't really matter. Just trying to chip away at that armor that they created, unfortunately, because the barrier was up instead of the block early on.
I agree with the risk, though.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's just, it's a tough matchup, especially when you draw rather poorly. You don't get Arcane Intellect, Cold Light Oracle.
And that's the thing is North Carolina doesn't necessarily have the information that this is second ice barrier. They haven't seen an ice block come down yet, and a lot of times you'll only see 1 ice barrier in these decks. So perhaps once again, Poly Montreal setting a very small trap here, gain a little bit more life.
Small but sizable trap, I would say. Any little bit helps here for Poly Montreal, and this certainly will do them some good.
It's not the worst result.
I mean, North Carolina has some clean trades here if they want them. Do you just Nova and go face? I don't even know.
I think you do.
Their hand is just not doing them any favors.
You really don't want to trade your minions in this spot. Like they are far and away the aggressor.
Far and away?
They have to be the aggressor. They do not have inevitability on their side.
Maybe like pretty close and near.
Do you mean like just in terms of what's actually happening, or what their role is?
Just in terms of what the deck can do. I mean, yes, if you get an explosive start with Mana Worm and Sorcerer's Apprentice and Arcane Missile and maybe Mirror Image, then yes, you are aggressive. But here,
how do they win? They have to get the damage through. Like,
it's just been bad.
Poly Montreal's got the edge.
Yeah, I mean, Antonidas
they don't need to close as quickly.
Antonidas is likely they're out.
Well, if they're frostbolting here, I don't think Antonidas is in the deck.
I would like to see them saving some cheap spells. If they have it, maybe they don't have it. Maybe it's double Pyroblast. You can't Dirty Rat a Pyroblast.
That's typically the game plan that I've seen is double Pyroblast. And that's kind of what I mean by they're the aggressor. They're the ones that have to push the action. If they give Poly Montreal the time, they very easily piece together the tools they need and close it. North Carolina has to be that step ahead. They absolutely have to be.
And there's still 2 Fireballs, 1 Frostbolt, potentially 2 Pyroblasts, a Primordial Glyph. There's a lot of burn left.
Firelands Portal.
Firelands Portal, yeah.
There's stuff there, they just don't have any cards.
They need to pick up Acolyte of Pain, Arcane Intellect, Cold Light Oracle before they unlock that burn.
Well, they do get a card draw of the Mirror Entity, so...
good case.
Paid
good
off.
Scenario.
Ice Block is like a card draw, though.
It's true.
Turn.
It's true.
Again, I think they were just hoping for a bigger payoff. Hope they just jam the Alex.
I can't blame him. And maybe here, Loot Hoarder kills a minion and draws you a card.
I guess ideal scenario is your opponent just never plays Alex draws. But.
Yes, well, when does that ever really happen?
So Poly Montreal uses the Medivh Valet here rather than just the hero power. And that's really interesting to me because I don't really see the strongest purpose of their minions on board at this stage. That's a really interesting play.
I think Poly Montreal has definitely the read that North Carolina has no ice barriers in deck. We saw the Arcanologist not pull a card.
Just start chipping away.
Yeah, 2 damage to face.
This is one of the saddest Frost Novas I've seen in a long time.
You gotta do what you gotta do.
Excuse me, you are on fire.
Yeah, 2 mana, 2/3 Frostbolt.
Oh, baby.
Not bad.
Oh, boy.
That's pretty good too, though.
Oh, boy.
Huh. So,
Wow.
is it Antonidas Frostbolt? Is it just that easy?
Looks like it, but
Hope your opponent doesn't have Fireball hero power.
Yep.
Even if they do have Fireball, that's 6 damage that's not going to your face.
a lot of it, too, is just that like, how long can they afford to wait? The Primordial Glyph is likely in the deck.
Yeah.
That can produce some cheap spells. Maybe they just have some low 1 cost or stuff in there they can do. But if those two things don't seem like a real possibility, Archmage Frostbolt's a lot of value that you're getting. And again, if North Carolina fireballs and uses hero power in this, you bought 7 extra life, your minions are now getting through. That 1 card is producing a ton if that's the case.
And this is an absolute must remove for North Carolina, so, or not.
They're going to race them. So in this spot, this is an interesting play here from North Carolina. This may look like it's the wrong idea, but here's their game plan. It's sit behind ice blocks, it's draw lots of burn spells, it's hope Poly Montreal can't protect themselves twice. If they can't do that, maybe there's a chance.
You know what? I respect this very highly. They're taking pretty much their only chance to win at this point. They're sticking to their game plan, and removing Antonidas would have been 7 damage that they need to close out this game. So yes, they're relying on the top of their deck, but they've got that ice block to sit behind.
When luck shuts
It's
the
their
door,
only shot.
you got to open up the window. So they need a burn spell this turn, and then they need to draw Pyroblast. Well, there's a Pyroblast, so it's down to 3. So actually, this is even a better pan out now
Because they need to play block next turn.
That's right. So if Poly Montreal didn't have that second ice block, North Carolina would almost have this locked up in terms of them drawing a burn spell to win. But
The thing
we see
is-
the other ice block.
1 fireball down. There's 1 fireball left in deck. Frostbolts are gone. Even if you fireball them, you leave them at 2.
Exactly. Like, to me, I look at North Carolina's deck. I'm like, what's left? It's like Cold Light Oracle, Primordial Glyph, Firelands Portal. Like,
Arcane Intellect.
there's a ton of burn left in that deck. They've drawn almost all their minions thus far.
It's just that second block.
It's protecting them.
And we thought Arcane Intellect into double block was bad. It was pretty bad, but
I am curious
if attacking with
if that ice block they took
Yeah.
earlier on. Now, they wouldn't draw Pyroblast this turn is the thing. They would have
True.
one this card draw. But could that have played an impact? I don't really know. But
I mean, Poly Montreal gained 16 armor this game.
it did a lot of damage to minions, though. Oh, my. If this produces Kabbalist Tome,
Flame Geyser, they could pop him at 1.
wow. So now they're reliant on somehow producing another ice block from their deck. If North Carolina can produce another ice block, they can win.
But that's both glyphs gone. Are they running Kabbalist Tome?
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
That's Alex Straza, though. Wow.
That's all she wrote, folks.
They're just going to go with ice block. I mean, the ice block alone here from Poly Montreal is basically all she wrote. But this is
It's
purely
super all
reliant.
she wrote.
This is purely reliant on if North Carolina can produce another ice block. Babbling Book comes to mind.
That's a good point. Book could do it.
But now there's the backup of the Alex Straza, so they'll go back to 15 after that.
And then you need to
They need a miracle here, like a chain of
Kabbalist
Kabbalist
Tome
Tomes.
into Ice Block, Fireball, and
Not
then you need
quite.
Pyroblast.
1 game apiece now in set number 2 as
also,
well.
Also, sets number 1 and 3.
Yeah, so this is tied up all across the board. The rest of the games we see will be deciding sets. The first team to take 2 sets wins the match.
We are on set point for all 3 of these. First team to take 2 will win the match. Talk about a close one. This is about as much of a nail-biter as it can be.
And I'm curious how that game pans out if they just don't draw all of their freeze effects and all their ice blocks naturally. They got 1 Arcanologist activation. They drew the other ice block. Both Frost Novas were early on. Those are burn spells instead. Did they get there?
They had the option for the 3rd ice block and decided to go with Mirror Entity instead. It did get them 1 draw deeper into their deck and remove the Arcanologist from the board.
Which was the timely Pyroblast draw. So.
Man, it's tough to say, but let's take a look at our score. Of course, it's all tied up in all 3 of these sets. So 1 win will take it all in each of the sets, and 2 sets will take the match.
It also potentially means we're seeing all 9 classes from both teams.
Yeah, it is.
So
of course, if the 2 sets we see first all go in the same direction, then we won't see the final set, but
I've liked it so far. There's been a lot of diversity amongst the classes. We saw polarizing warrior builds. We saw variations of the Paladin that were in there. We saw handlock already. We've seen a minion burn freeze mage and a more traditional freeze mage in this match. There's a lot of diversity in these 2 lineups, and that's what happens when you get into the early stages of these metagames. There's a lot of opinions on both sides. No one quite has the list that they're looking for just yet. It evolves by the hour.
it adapts, as one might say. And now we're going into game number 3 of set number 1. Of course, the crowd continuing to support these teams up on stage. Is that TJ? Or is that just a guy that looks like TJ from the back?
A lot of people look like TJ from the back.
That's a good point.
Just saying. Could be TJ, though. It's honestly, the fireside here is, to me, that's one of the coolest aspects as well. There's devs on site to play games. They're running 8-player tournaments on the side. There's just a big fireside that's taking place. Showing up to tournaments and big events that had a lot of people at them, I think that's what kept me playing cards for so long.
It's an experience that I haven't had up until this point, and I'm absolutely ecstatic to be here. And here we see Poly Montreal on the Rogue. It is not a quest build. So this is going to be more of a miracle style or potentially a tempo Rogue, which is a lot more aggressive. And then North Carolina on what looks to be a standard mid-range Hunter.
Yeah, Hunter's Mark is an interesting tech choice. I've seen this be Deadly Shot at times. I've just seen this be extra minions at certain points. But the main focus of their deck is to take advantage of the fact that they have a beast on board. A lot of times their beasts will simply replace themselves when they die, as we see all 3 of the minions here do. But their main goal, again, is to land Crackling Razor Maw, buy themselves some tempo, land Houndmaster, get that big stat swing and start pushing damage. Their central focus is to take advantage of their board state. That's a Barnes added in there as well.
Ooh,
so
I like it.
That accounts for a lot of the potential Death Rattle minions, but they have Deadly Shot and they have Hunter's Mark. So some additional removal in here, and that could be important against cards like Edwin Van Cleef. Oftentimes, that's one of the more troubling minions for a Hunter to handle, just because it's so big. They don't really have strong ways to interact with it.
And Deadly Shot, yes, it's an easy removal, but it is random. So if you have a minion on your opponent's board that you need to remove, and there's multiple minions on board, maybe Hunter's Mark is going to be the easier way to do it. Certainly combines well with Unleash the Hounds. The Barnes is really interesting to me. It indicates that we might be seeing an Infested Wolf in this deck as well, because you want as many of those Death Rattle minions in your build to benefit from the Barnes.
Yeah, we saw Rat Pack, which is just kind of a more mana-efficient way of it. Again, we've seen Savannah Highmane. There's a lot of Death Rattles we've seen so far. Actually, Jeweled Macaw and Barnes are the only 2 Death Rattle non-Death Rattle minions that we've seen thus far from the deck. But Poly Montreal's hand is looking oh so nice. Swashbucklers replacing themselves. The Edwin Van Cleef getting close to getting a line, and the fact that they're seeing just a single minion that won't stick to the board, it means that the Swashbuckler and Patches can start delivering damage. Overall, to some degree, there is race potential here, but they need board in order to do that for Poly Montreal. So the fact that they have the board early and they start chipping away, a big benefit to them overall.
Yeah, very nice hands from both teams, actually. What a way to end set number 1. Some options here still for Poly Montreal this turn. Hero Power would protect the 2 minions on board. You could also just go all in with the Swashbuckler and the Raptor Hatchling, which came off of the first Swashbuckler. That's Death Rattle. Put a 1-mana 4/3 minion in your deck.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious where those sit. You know, I'd like the hero power a lot because it gives you the flexibility of delaying Edwin for the right turn. But I also like the 2 minions as well. Just get some extra stuff on board to fight with and go straight into the Edwin on the following turn. There's a lot of options here. And the hero power, to me, mostly accounts for Unleash the Hounds.
Yeah.
If you just go wide on board and your opponent lands an Unleash, they could very easily make it even again. So kind of hedging their bets against that one and at the same time buying some flexibility. I think this is the right spot for Poly Montreal.
Well, the Grandmother coming out means that Backstab finds a really nice target. If Poly Montreal picks up something else they'd like to use with the preparation, this is going to be a big Edwin Van Cleef.
This is going to be a big Edwin Van Cleef regardless. It's not often you see prep coin, but here I think it's the right call. This is a dagger attack, backstab into the 3/2 wolf that is left behind.
You can play the Swashbuckler first. If you get a spell, prep into that.
Yep, you have that option as well. This is a very big turn from Poly Montreal. This Edwin Van Cleef is one of the biggest payoff cards and biggest power spike cards in the game. And while Giant Sandworm isn't quite what they're looking for, I don't think they mind.
Still looking like a fantastic turn for them here. And this is actually because they chose to dagger up last turn. Means that they can get through this Grandmother without sacrificing their board now. It is fantastic for Poly Montreal.
Now, they might save the preparation here in case they draw something, and that looks like what they're going to do, but oftentimes I have found this to just simply not be the case. I think the bigger Edwin you produce is sort of the better. If the Edwin doesn't get answered, what's that preparation going to do? And if the Edwin does get answered, you've already invested quite a bit into the Edwin. So I personally, in this circumstance, have tended to go for +2/+2, but I've been punished for that as well. So there's merits to both sides.
It's a high-risk, high-reward play. Edwin Van Cleef can just end games within 2 or 3 turns. And here we see no easy way to remove it. For North Carolina, Deadly Shot is a 1 in 4. I don't think you can afford to take that risk. Black Knight coming into hand as well. This seems to me like a Hunter build that's trying to target Quest Warriors a little bit, maybe.
Well, just that and defensive stuff in general. I think that taking the board for Hunter is something it quite consistently does, but you need to be able to push through those minions afterwards. So if your opponent's just placing top minions in the way, Black Knight is a big swing to that board. North Carolina here is going to go for Barnes. So this is indicating that they want to get a Death Rattle minion in play, have that beast stick around, and then also be able to use the Crackling Razor Maul, perhaps poison on the Edwin Van Cleef. And what a surprise.
Hunter build, admirable.
That would indicate it's very much aimed at control.
You know what? This makes
case.
perfect sense. North Carolina was telling us they had a couple of surprises yesterday, and you said, just tell me one card. Just give me one of the best cards that we might see. And Sundance said, N'Zoth.
That's right.
Here it is.
That's right. And here, Poly Montreal, the other benefit that North Carolina has from this play is that if Barnes actually lives or gets attacked over, what that means is sometimes they'll have kill command potential to answer Edwin Van Cleef as well. If it doesn't get attacked over, it can increase the % chance that Deadly Shot connects with the Edwin Van Cleef. So the Barnes here, I think, absolutely the right call when you account for what the worst case scenario looks like, and especially when you account for the best case scenario. Now that's interesting. Oh, Unleash the Hounds. Keep forgetting about that one.
You want to keep your board
if they have 5 minions in play,
but limited.
If they have 5 minions in play, Unleash the Hounds plus Barnes would answer the Edwin Van Cleef. So they're playing around exactly Unleash the Hounds in that spot, but 8 damage delivered. Edwin is starting to do his job, and this is backed up by a Burgly Bully on the following turn. So if North Carolina cannot answer this Edwin Van Cleef, they are going to lose the game. I think this is coming down to a Deadly Shot here.
Crackling Razor Maw cannot adapt Barnes because he's not a beast. Animal Companion could potentially be Misha. Jeweled Macaw could give you...
Looks like a beast to me.
Iron for Grizzly.
Look at that outfit he's got.
Oh, he's a beast, but he's not a beast.
Yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down.
He's got flair, but you can't Houndmaster him.
But it doesn't destroy secrets either.
Hey! Hunter can do that, though.
They can't afford to delay it. They need this Deadly Shot to connect.
1 in 3. Ooh. That's a really dead Swashbuckler, but that's a really alive Edwin.
You hate to see that.
Yes, you absolutely do. 8, 9, 10, 12 potential here this turn with the SI7 agent drawn. It's not going to be game, but that's pretty much game.
It's very close. At this point, I'm looking at Poly Montreal's spot. Is clearing the Barnes or is clearing the Jeweled Macaw a higher priority? I would tend to say Jeweled Macaw due to the thought of Houndmaster. And just slam the Burgley Bully on board. If that connects one time, that's game.
Sometimes going all in on Edwin, it's just the absolute correct thing to do. And here, actually, if they'd played the preparation and the Edwin was a 10-10, game would have ended this turn.
Yeah, again, they can get punished for that sometimes, though. Like, they wouldn't necessarily have an activator for SI7 agent. It just merits to both sides.
It's absolutely true.
Makes it interesting.
In this case, he dealt 16 damage.
And he's still there. He forced a deadly shot onto a 1-1.
All right, so it's a 3-mana card I'll put in my deck.
67% of the
Questro
time.
doesn't have him anymore. Is there anything that can keep them alive? Companion can get Misha, and then you can Ravasaur Runt and get Taunt, and you think on board you're still dead.
Razor Maw. Divine Shield won't protect them.
Because either way you cut it, you have Dagger.
They're checked.
Edwin's connecting to face every time. This is checkmate.
Wow. Set 1 is going to go to Poly Montreal. Yeah, there's no way to stop it.
Nope, Divine Shield, even 2 taunts wouldn't be able to do it. They're going to try.
Come on, Bully, you're just rubbing it in at this point.
Well, he's a bully. What do you think he's supposed to do? He's living up to his name. All right, Poly Montreal taking set number 1. If they can take one more set, they're going to take this match.
Sigh of relief.
Yeah, I can't blame him.
Now it's Smiles. So now I feel like, Poly Montreal they were Smiles coming into this whole spot, but that one breath right there lets you know what kind of pressure these guys are under. This is there's a lot of money at stake for this tournament. They've been working all season long to get to this point. They take their first set. They still have one more to go out of the next 2. And those are going to be single game deciders at this point because they're tied up on those ends.
They just need to win one more game to win this match and move on to the semifinals. The scores thus far, of course, Poly Montreal just took set number 1. Frank Shadow putting in the work he needed to do for his team. It came close, but they ultimately got it, and it is tied up 1-1 in both sets 2 and 3. Jay Willie and Crusher 99 need to win both these games for their team to take it. We're going into set number 2, game number 3. Emmy Sci-Hi on the Priest and Jay Willie on the Warlock.
Our 8th classes seen for both teams is what it's going to be at this point. This is a true test of their ability to play Hearthstone across the board. I don't know about you, Cora, but I do not play 9 classes when I'm playing on ladder.
No, I don't. Unless you're one of those crazy streamers who does that set of 9 rotation all the way to Legend.
Or unless you just like to play all 9 classes.
What person actually... Is there anybody that evenly likes all 9 classes? We all have our biases. Well, yeah, we all have our favorites. I personally don't play a lot. Okay, fine.
Duh.
Mm-hmm.
These guys like pirates, isn't that right?
Some of us are wrong, some of us are right. Okay, they can't hear. Oh, no, they can hear you. All right, well, they don't know what they're cheering for.
I was just going to pretend they could hear me. Because then the cheers look like they're for me at that point, even though they're not.
A little confidence boost. Like I'm sure Poly Montreal just got when they won set number 1.
A little uncomfortable on North Carolina's side, and rightfully so. This looks like a Zoo Warlock they're playing. The Devilsaur Egg will greatly indicate that they want to take advantage of the synergy that they can produce. So a large part of that, we saw that in match number 1, was the Ravenous Pterodax, and being able to, or rather having to destroy one of your own minions to double adapt that 4/4. If you blow up a Devilsaur Egg, you get a 5/5 out of the deal as well. So their main focus is going to be getting on the board early on and then taking advantage of the minions they have there. You're going to see Direwolf Alphas. You're going to see Defenders of Argus. They're hoping that they can get a lot of value out of those minions, and then once they've controlled the board, start to produce damage from those effects. They rely on Life Tap to keep their gas very high.
To be fair, though, that was very effective against a mage deck, which didn't have a lot of minion combat. Priest has a lot bigger of a minion presence on board, so maybe not quite as effective, but still really, really strong.
It's definitely true. I mean, that's the one thing that Poly Montreal has to account for, though, is that they're playing one minion at a time. North Carolina, they're looking to have those major turns where they get multiple instances of buffs occurring. And for Poly Montreal, they're just simply trying to offset that in this matchup. Traditionally, Dragon Priest wants to just curve out and then punish the opponent for not being able to match their minions 1-for-1. In this spot, they're going to have to find ways to simply disrupt what North Carolina is doing and hope to find a big advantage through that.
Really interesting, actually. Poly Montreal decided to mulligan both copies of Dragonfire Potion in their opening hand. Dragonfire Potion can virtually wipe everything that is on North Carolina's board. But in this case, Poly Montreal said they need to get their early game. They need to fight toe-to-toe and just draw into those Dragonfires when they need them.
That's right. It's hard to keep a 6-mana card in your hand that's reactive, especially if you're not positive what you're facing off against. We saw that in the first game of this match was Fire Plume's Heart was kept in a Warrior versus Warrior matchup, and they ran into Pirate Warrior. They won the game despite that liability. And in this spot, Poly Montreal, I don't think they can afford to keep Dragonfire Potion if they're not absolutely certain it's necessary.
Look at this tasty turn 2. Double 1-drops coming down for North Carolina. Absolutely what they wanted to see. Turn 1 and 2 Shadow Visions coming into hand for Poly Montreal. That could potentially net them one of those board clears.
Yeah, I think one of the cooler cards in Journey to Angoro. It allows you to discover one of your spells that's in your deck. It creates an extra copy of it. And you get to add it to your hand right away. So you're paying 2 mana to find a tool, is the way that card operates. Very much Priest goes straight that direction. They need to find the right tools for the right situations. But now this is Devilsaur Egg into Ravenous Pterodax for North Carolina. This is got to be scary.
This is best case scenario. This is
Montreal.
A nuts zoo start.
I don't know, Cora. That is not looking like the hand that gets this job done.
I mean, Curious Glimmerroot is fun.
You mentioned the Dragonfire Potion being mulligan too, and they're starting to approach the turn where that's going to be best.
I mean, maybe you Shadow Visions for it.
That's what I'm thinking. Is Shadow Visions here is still looking okay. Not this turn. They need to get a minion on board to try to fight. That allow them to Power Word Shield as well. Maybe they draw a spell in their deck that would help them increase their odds to find Dragonfire Potion.
But will you have to coin Dragonfire on 5 if you can get it from the Shadow Visions? Yes, that'd be best case scenario, but that would really limit your options this turn. It's looking like they're kind of favoring Glimmerroot or Talon Priest and coin into a shield. They want to challenge this board however they can. They certainly don't know that Pterodax is coming down on 4 and is going to eat this egg, pop out a 5/5.
Well, it's definitely on their mind at this point. I mean, the egg very much indicates that card. So it's Cabal Talon Priest, and it's hope for the best at this point. So this is the major power spike for North Carolina, is the Pterodax on the egg, and this is a lot of value as well. So this is where they start their all-in, and honestly, they want to keep this at 4 power as well. No Shadow or Death would be a very big benefit for them. And so their next option, not quite as good on the second adapt, but still a 4/4 Stealth Divine Shield. Not a bad minion. I mean, maybe you just do buff it if they Shadow or Death.
Maybe. That means your other 5/5 lives.
You can't double Divine Shield it. That's the one thing you can't do.
Unfortunately, Divine Shield would be pretty divine. There we saw close-up of Jay Willie for North Carolina talking through their plays. Of course, they're playing 1v1, but this is a team tournament. They can still talk through everything.
Here's the point to make, is that there's already a 5/5 on board. Just get the extra power. So there's Death, there's Potion. There's 2 potions. Potion Madness doesn't help him quite as much, but
Wild Dragonfire.
I don't know, actually. So something to look at here is, say they took Potion of Madness.
Yeah.
They take the Voidwalker away. Or I'm sorry, they take the Possessed Villager away. They run over the Divine Shield with it. Then they get the benefit. Are they in a desperate enough spot to ever justify something as crazy as playing to draw a Dragonfire Potion? Here they're going to say no. They're going to say Shadow or Death is enough. We think we can recover this board, and this will be totally fine. But that is a thing to look at, is when you're so far behind that oftentimes you have to make desperate plays. I agree with them that they're not quite in that situation just yet, but that's certainly something to look at if this game snowballs out of control.
I think the fact that they still have board presence was a big factor in their decision there. Dragonfire would have killed the Cabal Talon Priest, wouldn't have advanced their board state all that much. So this case, you get the Divine Shield out of the way, which is really the big nuisance. And when you draw Dragonfire later on, you do have 2 of them in your deck, it will likely clear off the entire board.
That's a lot of damage. That is a lot of damage. And that is not a way to fight against it right now. Poly Montreal is looking nervous. But so is North Carolina.
They were looking very confident, up 1 set right now. So if Poly Montreal were to win this game, they would take the entire match and move on to the semifinals.
I mean, you noticed in game number 1, the attention was all divided. They were playing simultaneous games. Since then, they've been focusing on one game at a time. And they're huddled in closer. They're leaning in more. It's not quite as comfortable as it was after their last set.
But this is really where these teams shine. They played 7 weeks of Swiss as a unit, one game at a time. They played the regional playoff and championship brackets as a unit. In the first game of this match, they were divided. Now they're back together, and they can really focus all of their attention and all of their prowess into these situations and these last 2 games.
Well, I'm going to guess Renounce Darkness and Blood Impart in that deck. Glimmer Root, you have to guess which one of the cards was shown started in your opponent's deck. And they're rewarded with a Doomguard for their efforts, but I don't think it's quite enough here. They're so close to being able to turn this around, but I think the damage is just adding up to just too much.
Well, the Ravenous Pterodax coming into hand as well is another major threat. I think you want your 1/1 killing off the Talon Priest this turn, so maybe you choose to eat the Firefly or the Flame Elemental.
I would tend to say so as well. Life tap off the menu and you draw a minion quite this powerful.
Then you can choose to hit face for 8, put your opponent's down to 9.
Well, that's 3 health. And
how about a 4-mana 7/7? Yeah. No overload?
Poisonous doesn't look bad either. But, you know, they say, you know what? We haven't seen Shadow or Death. I don't think you have it. Team deal damage.
There's only 1 death left. If Dragonfire Potion comes down, it leaves the 2 big minions on board. Is there anything that Poly Montreal can draw here to get them out of this situation?
I mean, maybe like a James Franco card that does everything, but that's not James Franco, and it doesn't do everything. So I think that Poly Montreal is about to drop this set and have to go to the Nailbiter game.
Set number 3. Game number 3, 1 set apiece. It is all going to come down to the final game in this match, and we are going to have seen all 9 classes for both teams.
I can't think of anything that could get. There's just not a 3-cost dragon that does anything here.
Now Guardian rotated. That's still not 3-cost. Fairy Dragon.
We're going to take a peek. Did we forget about anything? No.
No, we did not.
Well played.
Game number 9.
Talk about a nail-biter of a series. All right, 1 set apiece. Set number 1 went over to Poly Montreal, and set number 2 now in favor of North Carolina. It's all going to come down to Brio versus Crusher 99 in whatever their third matchup is.
And when I talked to North Carolina yesterday, they were talking about their season and their playoffs, and they said again and again and again they were in Game 5 situations that could have easily gone either way. And they've managed to win all of those Game 5 situations every single time. They went 5-2 in the regular season. They went 5-1 in playoffs. That is a lot of clutch matches to get through to get to this point. Can they clutch the most important game that they've played thus far?
Well, this is their very last opportunity in this tournament. If they lose here, they are out. The winner moves on to the semis, and it is going to be Druid for Poly Montreal and the Priest for North Carolina. We've seen a lot of Dragon Priest, but Control Priest also is very viable right now. Priest itself is just in a really chaotic position, I would say.
I would tend to agree with you. They play a very similar style, which is take advantage of health-efficient minions, but they have very different endgames, where Dragon Priest, they're trying to utilize Primordial Drake and the excess cards from Draconid Operative. Control Priest is more focused on getting a lot of cards from Lyra, and oftentimes getting that giant board that's produced from free from Amber, which discovers an 8-cost or higher minion that you put into play for 8 mana. So I am curious to see which one of the directions they've chosen to take. And again, we've seen a lot of dynamic on both sides. It's oftentimes been different approaches. We saw the Handlock for Poly Montreal. We saw Zoo for North Carolina. We saw Freeze Mage for Poly Montreal. We saw an aggressive Burn Freeze Mage for North Carolina. The Priest is going to be Dragon Priest, though, but the Druid is pretty much set in stone from what I've been seeing. I've seen a lot of aggressive Druid builds that simply try to buff their minions to get the job done.
If the Priest can get online early, they can combat the early aggression from the Druid, but the board clears aren't coming until turn 5, and Druid can put on a lot of pressure and a lot of damage. They want to kill their opponent by turn 5.
That's right. They're trying to just create a wide board state of minions and take advantage of Mark of the Lotus, Power of the Wild, Savage Roar. Just get that big payoff from those buff effects. For Crusher 99 and North Carolina, their goal is to stifle that as much as possible. It means getting minions on board that can fight for that position. It means keeping them there with buffs from Cabal Talon Priest and from timely hero powers chosen at the right time. It is what I would consider an uphill battle, but not quite as uphill as you would think. With this hand in particular, though, this is where I'm worried for North Carolina.
It is a fantastic start for Brio and Poly Montreal, but looking at North Carolina's hand, they have some early game. They have Priest of the Feast, which can gain them some health. They're not out of it by any means. It's a pretty good start for them, too.
Yeah, my question here is are they going to coin out a minion to start contesting right away? Or are they going to go with the Netherspite Historian? The Historian does really nothing to start affecting the board right now.
No dragon even in hand.
Oh, you're right. Oh, gosh, I didn't even see that point.
Maybe you go coin Glimmerroot, hope they don't kill it, Talon Priest to follow up.
Well,
ideally, that's the best case scenario, and you hope they don't have any buffs.
That helps.
Radiant Elemental makes this a lot easier.
A lot easier. Now Power Word Shield costs 0, and you have a 2/5 instead of a 1/3 or a 3/3. So that's certainly the play.
Quite a draw for North Carolina. Dare I say exactly what they needed at this point.
I'm trying to think if there was anything better even in the deck.
On turn 2,
And there's no Galaka Crawler for Elementals.
I don't even want to imagine that world. They're taking their time.
I mean, is there anything they can discover from, or find off the Glimmerroot rather, that would help them?
Swipe would be nice.
Only doesn't hit anything.
Wrath would
right
be
now.
decent.
I don't think Wrath's in the deck.
Well, I'm seeing double egg nappers. I will have to agree with you on that one.
Yeah, what's Savage Roar or Mark of the Lotus going to do for them at this point? This is Radiant Powered Shield, I think. Just going over the options, and rightfully so. This is the last game for them. They should be taking their time and exploring all their options.
And this is so difficult from a caster standpoint because we had a chance to sit down with both of these teams, and they're both so deserving and so talented as players and students. And it all coming down to this final game really is a great way to end this series. I couldn't be happier.
Is that the draw they're looking for in Power of the Wild? They can get 4 buffs out of this, and that puts none of them in range of the Radiant Elemental's attack.
Do you kill this elemental, though? You'd have to throw 3 attacks into it?
I think you start pushing because, again, their game plan is just to find the big payoff with Savage Roar at some point. They have Egg Nappers to follow it. They have Defender of Argus to follow it. You know, maybe the Defender of Argus tilts them towards a trade, shut it down, and make sure that Cabal Talon Priest doesn't land, and your opponent has a minion that just hits something every single turn. I mean, that's a realistic possibility as well.
I mean, Talon Priest is worst case scenario here for Poly Montreal. If it comes down, this Radiant Elemental is likely never dying. So yes, you sacrifice 6 damage here, but maybe you give yourself an advantage going forward. They just want to go all face. Can't blame them for this decision. It is what the deck is built to do.
I can't either. To me, this looks like the play. The Radiant Elemental is not contesting anything on board right now, and suddenly Defender of Argus, Savage Roar, Mark of the Lotus, they're all big threats now.
Very clearly defined roles in this matchup. Poly Montreal is the aggressor, and if North Carolina can live long enough and can stabilize, they will likely win this game. But do they just take too much damage if they drop Cabal Talon Priest? That's an additional 8 that Poly Montreal can throw to face.
I mean, they can't really stop that. They would have to get a lucky Shadow Visions, and what would Shadow Visions even be?
I mean, maybe next turn they can Priest of the Feast, coin Shadow Visions, gain 6.
That's what I'm
maybe
thinking.
Get Power Word Shield off of Shadow Visions, gain another 3.
I think that's the place to be right now.
Maybe that's just what you have to do. You're assuming that Poly Montreal is not killing your minions. You saw that they went face last turn.
Well, if they attack here, the Defender of Argus could potentially threaten that Radiant Elemental. So that's something else for them to look at as well. And Vicious Fledgling, here's the deal. For Poly Montreal, it's simply a matter of getting the most out of their minions at this point. Vicious Fledgling is one of the bigger payoff cards they can get. If, say, they innervate this on turn 1 and it's unchecked, the adapts can be quite insane. Hit win for you off the first one usually means you're getting a second adapt. They have Egg Napper to try to simulate just extra minions in play. It creates a wide board state. You get more value from their buffs. They have the board right now. Is this enough?
The thing is, Radiant Elemental on board. Poly Montreal's been paying attention. They know coin is still in hand for North Carolina, meaning that if they were to Argus and double trade, Nova clears 3, Dragonfire clears all with the coin and the Elemental still on board.
It's a lot to think about in this situation. The Dragonfire would oftentimes clear opposing minions as well. I think that at this point, killing the Animal is the right call.
Yeah.
It's still 2 attacks. They got the damage from the previous turn. And either way you look at it, their minion is going to be threatened alongside the Radiant Elemental and the Cabal Talon Priest. So they lose that damage, but they pull away options from North Carolina. You were just mentioning Priest of the Feast, Coin, and Shadow Vision. That's no longer a possibility.
Yeah, I think going face first off instead of killing the Elemental was absolutely correct. And here, the risk was greater than the reward. By killing the Elemental, their board is still quite stable. It's not Dragonfire Potion turn for North Carolina yet, even with the coin. I think this was the right choice.
This could also get the Fledgling down. There's no chance for North Carolina to really use hero power here unless they're going to use the Shadow Visions and search for Dragonfire Potion exactly.
Oh, that means they're committed fully to Dragonfire next turn. Egg Napper, Death Rattles into 2/1/1s. There's Savage Roar in deck, Power of the Wild, Mark of the Lotus. There's still a lot of damage, even through AoE for Poly Montreal.
I think they have to take it, though. I mean, they are not going to win this game if if Poly Montreal continues to stay ahead. So they just try to cut as much damage as they can and hope that Dragonfire can bring it home.
This is 9.
Is that a Living Mana? And now a follow-up to the Dragonfire Potion. Living Mana destroys your mana crystals and fills up your board instead with 2/2s for each mana crystal gone.
So Egg Napper and a hero power on the Talon Priest seems really strong here. It's the most resilient play they have through AoE.
And when Shadow Visions just happened, that AoE is much more likely. So they almost certainly are playing Egg Napper here. I think that playing Vicious Fledgling is quite greedy in this spot.
It would be better against Holy Nova, but I think you need to hedge your bets.
I think it's very similar versus Holy Nova. Yeah, Egg Napper's definitely the play. 9 damage as well.
Deciding where they want this hero power to go.
Well, if you're anticipating Dragonfire Potion, does killing the 3/1 even make sense? Is Dragonfire Potion the only way?
In that case, you miss 1 damage.
That North Carolina gets back?
If Nova were to come down here,
it's not quite.
Talon Priest would go up to 3.
I'm thinking Potion of Madness would be also quite devastating at times.
Yes.
So I like the attack onto the Cabal Talon Priest to account for that additional out. And there's no option here. It is Dragonfire Potion.
Leaves behind 2/1/1s. Then Poly Montreal has the option to either Egg Nap or Vicious Fledgling, or just Living Mana, fill up the board with 5 additional Treants.
I think either one of those is good because the Treants restore your mana when they die. So if there's another board sweep, that means you just have minions to back that up. I think either of their plays look fine in this spot. And in this spot, it would only be 5 2/2s.
So maybe that's incentive. Well, now you can just put down 2 Fledglings if you really want them. You saw 1 Dragonfire. What's the odds they have another?
Yeah, Bookworm, I think, is really the thing to think about here.
That's a great point, too.
For Poly Montreal. It's Bookworm or it's double Shadow Word Pain. Say they go with 2 Fledglings, they run into a pair of Shadow Word Pains, and then a heal. Maybe they get back into it at that point. I like the Living Mana simply because it gives North Carolina the least amount of time to draw another AoE spell. It's right now.
True, and you just saw the Dragonfire Potion created from Shadow Visions. So maybe you have the read that North Carolina doesn't have another AoE in hand. There's another Shadow Visions, but they don't have the mana.
Do they have Shadow Word Horror? Destroy all 2 power minions?
Wow, I would be really, really disappointed if they did.
That is like the only way they get back into this game.
That card is horrible, and I doubt it is in the deck. Priest of the Feast, Shadow Visions. Puts you at 13, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13.
They would need a 0-cost spell off the Shadow Visions. It's not there.
Heartbreaking. The Nova would have cleared board if they had just one more mana, but the Druid just too quick. Living mana there was absolutely the correct choice for Poly.
Threat and lethal. They put the most on board, and Poly Montreal rewarded for their efforts. 13 on board, game number 9. All the way through, they're going to beat North Carolina 2-1.
Set point and match point for Poly Montreal. Relief on their faces. You can see them fist bumping after this incredible victory. They are moving on to the semifinals. What a way to win.
Druid is so good right now, and they were tested across the board. All 9 classes had to be played. They end up victorious in this one, a grueling 9-game battle.
Heartbreaking for North Carolina, but they have participated in Tespa Collegiate Series previously, and there will be plenty more for them to participate in as well. But right now, the name of the game is Poly Montreal.
You got to be proud of your performance at this point.
Oh, absolutely.
There were hundreds of teams in this competition, and to be in the final 8 is like the top 1% of teams participating. They're not going away empty-handed, and it's been a fantastic experience for them as well. I mean, you got to be proud of yourself at that point.
Absolutely. You were one of the top 2 teams in your entire region of the United States and Canada to make it to this point. You get a trip to California, to the esports arena in Santa Ana. You get to participate in just what is such an incredible event, and a little bit of scholarship money to go home as well. But Poly Montreal moving on to the semifinals, keeping their championship bid alive. Let's check out just how things went down, because it was quite a series, Admirable.
It certainly was. We saw the first 2 sets take place in game number 1. While the third set continued to happen. It was about a 35-minute battle that happened on that end. But we saw a lot of different archetypes within classes represented in these 2 teams.
And ultimately, Poly Montreal was able to win set 1 and set 3, meaning they ultimately win the match. So that is fantastic for them. We have an interview ready with our winners. It's Poly Montreal, so we're going to send it over to Dan, who's down on the stage.
Thank you very much, Cora and Annabelle. Let's get this out of the way. Shake my hand. All right, good. So I have peace of mind. Congratulations, Poly Montreal. You guys are going to the semifinals. Not only that, you guys are the only team from Canada. Is that extra special for you?
Yeah, that's really special, because the whole Canadian community tweeted at us and showed us they picked us as their champion. So that's a lot more pressure, but we're proud too. Yeah.
And you guys, of course, picked yourselves for your champion to get the packs, right?
Yeah, of course.
All right, well, so far so good. At least 1 pack checked off there, and of course, the more money you win for scholarships as well. Just asking about that series, really intense, another 9-game series under your belts. What was the game that stuck out to you?
I think it was the Shaman versus Druid game I played, because before that, it didn't really go very well for us, and this game really started up our win, I think. So after that, it went a lot better.
Yeah, momentum is really a big thing. The team communication, of course, is on point. Do you guys feel like you were flowing a lot better?
Yeah, after this game, for sure, it was a lot better. We were communicating better. The matchups were a lot better, I think, yeah.
And how do you feel about your semifinal match tomorrow?
Honestly, we don't have studied yet the opponent, but I think we're pretty confident with our list now that we've played 1 set like this.
All right, well, so far, so good. Congratulations. Our second semifinalist from Canada is Poly Montreal. With that, let's head back to our commentators, Cora and Admirable.
Well, Admirable, if beanies are a measure of confidence, these guys have it in spades. They may not have studied yet for their semifinal match, but they have plenty of time now to get ready for tomorrow. So, excellent job to Poly Montreal. And let's, of course, check out our bracket. We've seen 2 matches so far today. Shawnee State coming out over Cal, and now Poly Montreal in a nail-biter taking the win against North Carolina. Our next match of the day will be UT San Antonio taking on Colorado State. We are at the esports arena in Santa Ana, California. It's been a fantastic day so far. We've got 2 more matches and 2 more semifinalists coming your way, so don't go anywhere.